The universe operates on principles we understand: physics, chemistry, the fundamental laws of cause and effect. Warp fields bend space, transporters convert matter to energy, replicators reassemble molecules with precision. But what happens when something appears that doesn't match any known pattern in Federation databases? When sensors detect a life form that reads as simultaneously organic and synthetic, human and machine, present and temporally displaced. Deep Space Nine's operations center erupted in controlled chaos as every console on the promenade deck flashed critical alerts. Major Kira Nerys gripped the tactical station railing, her eyes fixed on the three-dimensional schematic rotating before her. A bright red marker pulsated near Quark's bar, unauthorized transport activity with an energy signature that made absolutely no sense. "Report," Commander Sisko's voice cut through the confusion, calm and commanding as he strode from his office onto the operations deck. Chief O'Brien's fingers danced across his engineering console, his expression darkening with each passing second. "Sir, we've got a transporter event, but it's not using any technology one recognize. The energy signature's all wrong, there's temporal displacement markers, dimensional variance readings, and something that looks like molecular reassembly, but not the way our transporters work." Location. Sisko moved to stand behind O'Brien, studying the data stream. Quark's bar, upper level. Whatever came through, it's reading as a humanoid life form, but sensors are giving me contradictory data. 72% organic, 28% synthetic, not like Data or the Doctor on Voyager. This is integrated. Cybernetic. Kira was already moving toward the turbolift. Security team to the promenade. "Odo, you're with me." The changeling security chief materialized from his office, his expression even more dour than usual. "I was monitoring the incident. Whatever transported aboard isn't Dominion technology, but I want answers before this individual has time to establish a cover story." Down on the promenade, Quark's establishment had descended into its typical afternoon lull, Ferengi servers carrying drinks, the Dabo tables moderately active, the ambient hum of a dozen conversations in a dozen languages. Then the air 20 meters from the bar's entrance shimmered with an energy discharge that looked nothing like a Federation transporter beam. Instead of the familiar golden sparkle, reality seemed to tear, a brief, violent rupture in space accompanied by an electromagnetic pulse that made every light fixture flicker. Adam Jensen hit the deck hard, his Icarus landing system compensating automatically for the unexpected drop. His augmented vision flooded with error messages, spatial coordinates unknown, GPS satellites unavailable, network connections severed. The heads-up display overlaying his field of vision struggled to calibrate, flickering between thermal imaging and standard optical before stabilizing. He rose to his feet in one fluid motion, tactical assessment protocols engaging automatically. His environment, commercial establishment, approximately 47 occupants, multiple species he didn't recognize. Architecture suggested advanced technology. Curved surfaces, integrated displays, materials that didn't match anything in Serif Industries databases. His augmented hearing picked up conversations in languages his KC social enhancer couldn't parse, his neural implants offering no translation assistance. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Conversations died. A four-armed being dropped its glass. Something with spots covering its entire face backed away slowly. Jensen's retinal display tagged the approaching figures. Two humanoids, one appearing female in a rust-colored uniform with rank insignia he didn't recognize, the other, his augmented vision struggled to classify. Humanoid shape, but thermal imaging showed no body heat. The figure's mass seemed to shift subtly with each step. "I'm Major Kira Nerys, Bajoran Militia," the woman stated, her hand resting near a weapon holstered at her hip. "You've just materialized aboard Deep Space Nine, a Federation starbase. Identify yourself." Jensen's cybernetic eyes tracked 6 more security personnel entering the establishment, phaser rifles raised but not aimed directly at him, yet. His threat assessment subroutines calculated engagement options, escape routes, strategic advantages. The Typhoon explosive system registered as available but inadvisable, too many civilians. Cloaking would buy time but not answers. He raised his hands slowly, palms open, a gesture he hoped translated across whatever dimensional barrier he'd crossed. Adam Jensen. I'm not armed with hostile intent. A technical truth, his arm blades remained retracted, his weapon systems offline. Where am I? What year is this? The security chief, Odo, he'd called himself, moved closer, his features shifting subtly as if his face couldn't quite decide on a permanent configuration. You're asking what year it is? That's either a very sophisticated cover story or you've had a very unusual day. The latter. Jensen's gaze swept the room again, cataloging details. The technology level was clearly beyond 2029, but the aesthetic didn't match any corporate projection he'd seen. No augmentation advertising, no neuropozyne dispensaries, no visible class stratification between augmented and natural humans. Last thing I remember, I was in Detroit. Serif Industries was testing experimental spatial displacement technology. Something went wrong. Kira exchanged a glance with Odo. Detroit. On Earth? Yes. Michigan. United States. Jensen watched their expressions carefully, his social enhancer attempting to read micro-expressions despite the lack of baseline data. You're telling me I'm not on Earth anymore. You're in the Bajoran system, Odo replied, his tone carrying the measured cadence of an experienced interrogator. Deep Space Nine, a space station near the Bajoran wormhole. The year is 2372, and unless you're from a very isolated colony that somehow avoided 3 centuries of technological development, you're not from our timeline at all. The words hit Jensen like a physical blow. 2372, 343 years forward. The Illuminati conspiracy, the Humanity Front, Serif Industries, Megan, all of it gone, resolved or forgotten centuries ago. His legs remained steady through augmented stabilization, but his mind reeled. Every instinct screamed that this was a simulation, a trap, another layer of the conspiracy. But his cybernetic threat assessment found no deception in their biosigns, and his environmental sensors detected genuine vacuum beyond the station's hull. I need to verify that, Jensen said quietly. No offense, but in my experience, when someone tells you reality has fundamentally changed, it's usually because someone wants you to believe a lie. Odo's expression shifted, not quite a smile, but something that suggested grudging respect. A healthy skepticism. I appreciate that in an unexpected visitor. However, you'll be doing your verification from a holding cell while we determine whether you're a temporal anomaly, a dimensional refugee, or an exceptionally elaborate Dominion infiltration attempt. Dominion? Jensen's augmented mind cataloged the term for later analysis. Long story, Kira said, gesturing for the security team to move in. You'll have plenty of time to hear it. Right now, you're coming with us for medical scanning and a very thorough conversation about how someone from the 21st century ended up on my station with enough cybernetic hardware to set off every bioscan alarm we have. Jensen evaluated his options one final time. He could fight, his augmentations gave him significant tactical advantages. He could run, his cloaking system might buy enough time to find answers independently. But these people had information he needed, and starting his arrival in this impossible future with violence would only confirm whatever suspicions they already held. He'd spent years learning that sometimes the best way forward was to let others think they had control while you gathered intelligence. Lead the way, Major, Jensen said, lowering his hands slowly. But I want answers. Real ones. If I'm really 3 centuries out of my time, I need to know what happened to my world. As security personnel surrounded him, keeping a respectful but cautious distance, Jensen's augmented hearing caught fragments of whispered conversation from the bar's patrons. Words like cybernetic, augmented, and illegal filtered through the ambient noise. His social enhancer flagged the emotional context: fear, suspicion, curiosity. Whatever universe he'd landed in, augmentation clearly carried stigma. Some things, it seemed, never changed. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Trek universe, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Live long and prosper. The holding cell on Deep Space Nine was more sophisticated than any detention facility Jensen had seen in 2029, yet somehow more Spartan. A force field shimmered across the entrance, not physical bars, but a translucent energy barrier that his augmented vision identified as a coherent graviton beam. The cell contained a simple bench, a recessed alcove that appeared to be a lavatory, and absolutely nothing else. No surveillance cameras visible, but Jensen's electromagnetic sensors detected monitoring systems embedded in the walls themselves. He sat on the bench, methodically running diagnostics on his augmentations. The biocell reserve showed 83% capacity, higher than expected given the dimensional transition. Whatever energy had torn him from 2029 had apparently charged his systems rather than depleted them. His Titan shield registered operational but required recalibration for the station's specific energy frequencies. The KC social enhancer remained offline for alien physiologies, its database utterly useless 3 centuries beyond its programming. The holding area's main entrance opened with a pneumatic hiss. Odo entered first, his movements fluid in a way that seemed slightly off, too smooth, as if his joints didn't quite work like human ones. Behind him came a dark-skinned human male in a different uniform configuration, carrying a medical tricorder that hummed with active scanning frequencies. "Mr. Jensen," Odo began, positioning himself where he could observe both the prisoner and the entrance. "This is Dr. Julian Bashir, Deep Space Nine's Chief Medical Officer. He'll be conducting a bioscan. I suggest you cooperate." Bashir approached the force field, his expression curious rather than hostile. "I'll need to lower the containment field to get accurate readings. Odo assures me you're not planning anything violent." Jensen met the doctor's eyes. "I never asked to be here. I just want to understand what happened." Something flickered across Bashir's face, recognition, perhaps, or empathy. The force field deactivated with a subtle whine, and the doctor stepped inside, tricorder extended. "This won't hurt. I'm simply scanning your biosigns, cybernetic integration, and temporal displacement markers. Try to remain still." The device emitted a soft chirping sound as Bashir moved it across Jensen's body. The doctor's eyebrows rose incrementally with each passing second, his free hand occasionally adjusting the tricorder settings as if doubting its readings. "Remarkable," Bashir murmured. "The integration is. I've never seen anything like this. Your cybernetic components aren't simply attached to your organic systems, they're interfaced at the cellular level. Neural pathways rerouted and enhanced, skeletal reinforcement that somehow maintains organic bone structure while providing mechanical strength, synthetic organs functioning in perfect harmony with biological ones." He looked up from the tricorder. "Whoever performed this surgery was an artist." "Dr. Megan Reed," Jensen said quietly. "Seraph Industries head of cybernetics. She pioneered the techniques. And then she was taken. And I spent 2 years trying to find out why." Bashir's expression softened. "Someone important to you?" "Yeah." Jensen wasn't interested in discussing Megan with strangers, even sympathetic ones. "What else does your scan tell you?" The doctor studied his tricorder's display. "You're definitely human, DNA confirms Earth origin. But there's something unusual about your genetic structure. Your body isn't rejecting the augmentations. At all. Typically, cybernetic integration on this scale requires immunosuppressant regimens or genetic modification to prevent rejection. Your immune system has adapted. As if your body recognized the synthetic components as natural extensions rather than foreign objects." Jensen had heard similar assessments from Seraph Industries' medical team. His unique biology, the reason he'd been targeted for augmentation in the first place, had remained a mystery even to the scientists who'd rebuilt him. I don't require neuropozyne. Never have. Neuropozyne? Bashir's brow furrowed. I'm not familiar with that pharmaceutical. Anti-rejection medication. Standard treatment for augmented individuals in 2029. Most people need it daily or their bodies attack their augmentations. I'm different. Bashir exchanged a meaningful glance with Odo. That explains why our initial scans were confused. Your augmentations register as part of your biological matrix, not separate systems. The computer literally couldn't determine where the man ends and the machine begins. Story of my life, Doctor. Odo stepped closer, his features impassive. The temporal scans confirm his story. Chronoton radiation signature indicates passage through a temporal spatial anomaly. The energy pattern matches several documented wormhole phenomena, though with unusual variances. He's not from our timeline. The wormhole, Bashir said slowly. Could the Bajoran wormhole have intersected with his experimental technology? Possible, Odo conceded. Though the prophets typically don't allow random objects or people to transit without purpose. If Mr. Jensen arrived through the wormhole, they either permitted it or couldn't prevent it. Jensen's augmented mind catalogued the terms, prophets, wormhole, chronoton radiation. None of it matched his understanding of physics, but then again, he'd just been thrown 3 centuries into the future through a tear in spacetime. His old assumptions were worthless here. I need information, Jensen said. You've scanned me, confirmed I'm not lying about being temporally displaced. Now I need to know where I am, what year this really is, and whether there's any way back. Odo considered this, his expression unreadable. You'll get your answers. But first, I have questions about your augmentations. The technology you're carrying is centuries beyond what your timeline should have possessed. Cybernetic integration at this level shouldn't have been possible in the early 21st century. Serif Industries was ahead of its time. Jensen kept his voice neutral. David Serif invested everything in augmentation technology. He believed it was humanity's next evolutionary step. And you? Bashir asked quietly. What do you believe? Jensen looked down at his augmented hands. Synthetic skin over titanium alloy, neural interfaces firing in perfect synchronization with his thoughts. I believe I never asked for this. I was nearly killed in a terrorist attack. Augmentation saved my life, but it wasn't my choice. I woke up rebuilt, redesigned, and expected to be grateful. The doctor's expression shifted, something deeper than professional sympathy. I understand more than you might think, Mr. Jensen. The Federation has complicated views on enhancement. Complicated how? Bashir hesitated, glancing at Odo before continuing. In 2372, genetic augmentation is illegal in the Federation. Banned for over 2 centuries due to the Eugenics Wars, a conflict caused by genetically enhanced humans who believed themselves superior to unmodified humanity. A man named Khan Noonien Singh and his followers nearly destroyed Earth in the 1990s. The Federation's response was to prohibit genetic enhancement entirely. Jensen's tactical assessment protocols flagged the parallel immediately. And cybernetic augmentation? Legal, but heavily regulated, Odo interjected. Prosthetics for medical necessity are common. Combat enhancements for military personnel exist but are controversial. What you represent, full-body systematic augmentation approaching transhuman levels, that's unprecedented. Some will see you as a miracle of medical science. Others will see you as a threat. I've heard that before. Jensen's voice carried the weight of 2 years navigating augmentation prejudice, corporate conspiracies, and the Humanity Front's violent rhetoric. The naturals versus the augmented. The purity activists who think we're not human anymore. Same prejudice, different century. Bashir's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes. Some things don't change as much as we'd like. The doctor's tone suggested personal experience, but Jensen filed that observation away for later analysis. Right now, he needed concrete information. You mentioned a wormhole. Explain. Odo gestured toward the cell's wall, and a display panel activated, showing a three-dimensional representation of the station and surrounding space. A brilliant, swirling vortex of blue and white energy hung in the void, pulsing with rhythmic regularity. The Bajoran wormhole, Odo explained. A stable passage connecting the Alpha Quadrant to the Gamma Quadrant, opposite sides of the galaxy. 70,000 light-years traversed instantaneously. Inside the wormhole exist beings we call the prophets, non-corporeal entities existing outside linear time. To the Bajorans, they're gods. To Starfleet, they're a scientific mystery. Jensen studied the display, his augmented vision analyzing the energy patterns. And you think I came through this? The Chronoton signature is consistent, Bashir confirmed. But there's additional complexity. You're not just temporally displaced. You're dimensionally displaced. Your quantum signature doesn't match our universe's baseline. Whatever experiment Seraph Industries was conducting, it punched through more than just space and time. It breached dimensional barriers. The implications settled over Jensen like a physical weight. Not just 3 centuries forward. An entirely different reality. So there's no going back. I didn't say that, Bashir countered quickly. Temporal mechanics and dimensional theory are complicated, but not impossible. Starfleet has encountered similar phenomena before. Captain Picard of the Enterprise has dealt with temporal anomalies. Voyager is currently stranded 70,000 light-years from home and searching for a way back. If there's a method to return you to your proper timeline and dimension, we'll explore every option. Odo's expression remained skeptical. However, that investigation will take time. Meanwhile, you present a unique security concern. Your augmentations include weapons systems. We detected energy signatures consistent with explosive ordnance and directed energy weapons. You're essentially a walking armory. Jensen didn't deny it. I was head of security for Seraph Industries. My augmentations were designed for protection and tactical response. I'm not planning to use them unless someone gives me a reason. See that you don't, Odo said flatly. Deep Space Nine is currently operating under wartime protocols. The Federation is at war with the Dominion. A Gamma Quadrant power intent on conquering the Alpha Quadrant. Security is my primary concern, and an unknown element with your capabilities makes my job considerably more difficult. War. Jensen's voice was quiet. Always war. Different enemies, same pattern. Bashir deactivated his tricorder, his expression thoughtful. I'll submit my medical report to Commander Sisko. My recommendation will be that you're not a biological threat and your augmentations, while extensive, don't pose inherent danger. What happens next depends on the commander's assessment. And if he decides I'm too dangerous to let loose on this station, then you'll remain in this cell until we determine a safe alternative, Odo replied without hesitation. But if you cooperate, provide full disclosure about your augmentations and capabilities, and demonstrate you're not a security risk, there may be other options. Jensen considered the changeling security chief's words carefully. Cooperation had never been his strength. Corporate oversight, government interference, and conspiracy had taught him to trust nothing and no one. But these people had the resources and knowledge he needed. Fighting them would be counterproductive. Full disclosure, Jensen said finally. On one condition. Odo's eyes narrowed. You're not in a position to negotiate. I'm not negotiating. I'm offering a trade. I'll tell you everything about my augmentations, their capabilities, and limitations. In exchange, you tell me everything about this war you're fighting, this federation you represent, and what happened to Earth between 2029 and 2372. I need to know if the world I left behind survived, evolved, or destroyed itself. Bashir and Odo exchanged another glance, some unspoken communication passing between them. Acceptable, Odo said after a long pause. But the conversation happens in Commander Sisko's office, with full senior staff present. If you're going to be briefed on classified information regarding the Dominion War, I want multiple perspectives evaluating your reactions and responses. Fair enough. Jensen stood, his augmented musculature responding with precise efficiency. When? Immediately. Odo gestured toward the cell entrance. The commander is expecting us. And Mr. Jensen. If you attempt to escape, activate weapons systems, or demonstrate hostile intent, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your indefinite stay in this timeline confined to this cell. Do we understand each other? Jensen met the changeling's gaze evenly. Perfectly. I didn't survive 2 years of corporate conspiracy and terrorist attacks by being stupid. I know when cooperation serves my interests better than conflict. Good. Odo stepped aside. Then let's see if Commander Sisko agrees you're worth the risk. As Jensen walked past the security chief, Bashir fell into step beside him, his voice low enough that only Jensen's augmented hearing could catch it clearly. For what it's worth, Mr. Jensen, I meant what I said. I understand more than you think. Sometimes the galaxy doesn't give us choices about what we become. But it does give us choices about what we do with it. Jensen glanced at the doctor, seeing something in Bashir's eyes that his social enhancer couldn't quite parse even with limited functionality, kinship, perhaps. Recognition. Yeah, Jensen replied quietly. I'm still figuring that out, Doctor. They proceeded toward the turbolift in silence, and Jensen catalogued every detail of the journey. Because regardless of what Commander Sisko decided, regardless of whether this Federation proved trustworthy or simply another layer of conspiracy, Adam Jensen had learned one fundamental truth. Trust was earned through observation, verified through evidence, and maintained through constant vigilance. He'd apply those same principles to this impossible future. Commander Benjamin Sisko's office occupied the uppermost level of Deep Space Nine's Operations Center, a circular room with expansive viewports offering a panoramic view of the Bajoran system. Jensen's augmented vision immediately catalogued the tactical advantages: elevated position, multiple sight lines, reinforced transparent aluminum viewports capable of withstanding weapons fire. The desk was positioned to allow the occupant clear observation of anyone entering while maintaining proximity to command-level computer access. Sisko himself stood with his back to the door, hands clasped behind him as he gazed out at the stars. His uniform bore rank insignia Jensen's tactical database couldn't identify, but the man's posture communicated authority earned through experience rather than merely assigned through hierarchy. When he turned to face them, his eyes carried the weight of someone who'd seen combat, made impossible decisions, and lived with the consequences. Mr. Jensen, Sisko's voice was measured, neither hostile nor welcoming. Please, sit. Jensen took the offered chair, aware that Odo had positioned himself near the door while Bashir stood to the commander's left. The arrangement was deliberate, contained observation with multiple angles of assessment. Standard interrogation positioning disguised as cordial conversation. Sisko settled into his own chair, fingers steepled before him. Dr. Bashir's report indicates you're exactly what you claim to be. A human from Earth's early 21st century, temporally and dimensionally displaced through circumstances beyond your control. Odo's security assessment confirms you're not carrying pathogens, surveillance devices, or technology designed for espionage. That leaves us with an interesting dilemma. Which is? Jensen kept his voice neutral. What to do with you? Sisko leaned back slightly. Deep Space Nine isn't equipped to handle temporal refugees. Starfleet's Department of Temporal Investigations typically manages these situations, but given our current strategic position and the Dominion War, I'm reluctant to transfer you until we understand exactly what we're dealing with. You think I'm a security risk? I think you're an unknown variable during a time when unknowns get people killed. Sisko's gaze was direct, unflinching. You possess military-grade augmentations 3 centuries ahead of what your timeline should have achieved. You arrived through the Bajoran wormhole during a period of significant strategic importance. And according to Odo's preliminary assessment, your combat capabilities could potentially overwhelm standard security protocols. Jensen appreciated the honesty. So you want a full tactical briefing on my augmentations before you decide whether to trust me or lock me away indefinitely. That's one option. Sisko pulled up a display panel on his desk. The other is that we treat this as an opportunity for mutual benefit. You need information about this timeline, what happened to Earth, whether you can return home, how to survive in a universe that's fundamentally different from the one you knew. We need to understand your capabilities, assess whether you represent a threat, and determine if someone with your unique skill set might actually be useful in our current situation. The proposition was straightforward, but Jensen's experience with corporate negotiations had taught him to examine every angle. Useful how? That depends on what you can do. Sisko gestured toward Bashir. The doctor's medical scan provided a basic overview: enhanced strength, integrated weapons systems, sensory augmentation, and some form of defensive shielding. But I suspect that barely scratches the surface. Jensen ran a rapid cost-benefit analysis. Full disclosure carried risks, knowledge was leverage, and revealing his complete capabilities meant surrendering that advantage. But withholding information while confined to a space station where he had no allies, no resources, and no understanding of the local power dynamics was equally dangerous. He'd survived the Seraph Industries attack and the subsequent conspiracies by knowing when to share information strategically. My augmentations fall into several categories, Jensen began. Combat, infiltration, defense, and information gathering. The Typhoon explosive system deploys micro-explosive ordnance in a spherical pattern, close-range area denial. Arm-mounted retractable blades for close-quarters combat. Enhanced strength allows me to lift approximately 400 kilograms and punch through reinforced barriers. The Icarus landing system negates fall damage from any height. Odo's expression sharpened. Any height? I've tested it from 50 meters. Theoretically, the system could handle terminal velocity impacts, but I haven't had opportunity, or desire, to verify that. Sisko made notes on his PADD. Continue. Smart vision provides thermal imaging, electromagnetic detection, and the ability to see through most solid barriers up to approximately 30 meters. I can identify heat signatures, track electronic devices, and detect biological entities through walls. The Sentinel system provides a targeting overlay and trajectory prediction for ranged weapons. Jensen paused, gauging their reactions. The Titan shield generates an electromagnetic barrier that absorbs directed energy attacks and kinetic impacts. Duration is limited by power consumption. How limited? Odo asked. Approximately 8 to 10 seconds of continuous coverage before biocell depletion requires recharge. Effective against small arms fire, directed energy weapons, and explosive shrapnel. Less effective against sustained heavy weapons fire or area effect attacks. Bashir leaned forward slightly. These biocells. How do they recharge? Passive energy absorption from ambient electromagnetic fields and kinetic motion. Active recharge stations existed in 2029, but I'm guessing those don't exist 3 centuries in the future. I've been running diagnostics since I arrived. The station's power systems are actually charging my reserves faster than expected. Whatever energy technology you're using is more efficient than anything we had. Plasma-based EPS grid, O'Brien's voice came from the doorway, and Jensen's augmented hearing had detected the chief's approach several seconds before he spoke. The engineer entered carrying a PADD and looking distinctly curious. Commander, I've been analyzing the energy signature from Mr. Jensen's arrival. He's not wrong about our power systems being compatible. His cybernetic components are designed to interface with electromagnetic fields at frequencies that happen to overlap with our EPS relay network. Sisko gestured for O'Brien to join them. Meaning if he wanted to, he could potentially tap directly into the station's power grid. Not enough to cause system failures, but enough to keep his augmentations running indefinitely. O'Brien studied Jensen with an engineer's analytical interest. That's assuming he hasn't already figured that out. Jensen had, in fact, identified 17 potential access points within the holding cell alone. But admitting that seemed counterproductive to building trust. I haven't attempted to access your power systems, Jensen said carefully. Though yes, I identified the theoretical possibility. In 2029, unauthorized grid access was a felony. I'm assuming laws haven't gotten more lenient in 300 years. Quite the opposite, Odo replied dryly. But I appreciate the restraint. Sisko's expression remained neutral. You mentioned infiltration capabilities. Elaborate. This was the sensitive territory. Jensen's cloaking system represented technology that could fundamentally alter tactical situations, and revealing it meant acknowledging he'd been capable of escaping custody at any point. Glass shield cloaking system, Jensen stated flatly. Renders me effectively invisible to visual and most electronic detection methods for limited duration. Approximately 7 seconds before biocell depletion. Reactivation requires a brief recharge period. The room's atmosphere shifted subtly. Odo's features hardened almost imperceptibly, while O'Brien's eyes widened slightly. Sisko's expression didn't change, but his fingers stopped moving on the PADD. You've had personal cloaking technology this entire time, Odo said slowly, and you allowed yourself to be confined to a holding cell. Because escaping would have been pointless, Jensen replied. I'm on a space station in a universe I don't understand, 3 centuries displaced from everything I knew. Where would I go? What would I accomplish besides confirming your suspicions that I'm a threat? He met Odo's gaze directly. I told you before, I know when cooperation serves my interests. Running would have been tactically stupid. Sisko studied Jensen for a long moment, and the silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, the commander nodded slowly. That demonstrates more strategic thinking than most people show under stress. Continue your briefing. Jensen detailed the remaining augmentations, the KC social enhancer that read microexpressions and predicted conversational outcomes, though currently offline for alien physiologies. The hacking capabilities that allowed him to penetrate electronic security systems, the neural implants that processed information faster than baseline human cognition, the enhanced sensory suite that detected electromagnetic emissions, chemical compounds, and biosignatures. When he finished, Sisko sat back in his chair, expression thoughtful. You're essentially a one-man intelligence and tactical operations unit. Someone invested enormous resources in creating you. David Seraph invested everything, Jensen corrected. He believed augmentation was humanity's future. I was his proof of concept, the first fully integrated cybernetic human who didn't require immunosuppressants. He wanted to show the world what was possible. And what happened to him? Bashir asked quietly. To Seraph Industries? To the augmentation movement? Jensen's jaw tightened. That's what I need to know. The last thing I remember, augmentation prejudice was tearing society apart. The Humanity Front was bombing clinics, corporations were weaponizing the technology, and governments were debating legislation that would effectively create a two-tier species. I need to know if we destroyed ourselves or if we found another path. Sisko exchanged glances with his senior staff before speaking. The truth is complicated, Mr. Jensen. Earth's 21st century was turbulent. The Eugenics Wars I mentioned earlier actually occurred in the 1990s, not during your lifetime. But the genetic augmentation that caused them created a legacy of fear that lasted centuries. By the mid-21st century, Earth was dealing with the aftermath of World War III, a nuclear conflict that killed 600 million people. The number hit Jensen like a physical blow. 600 million. More than 10 times the casualties of both world wars combined. When? His voice was barely above a whisper. Between 2026 and 2053, Bashir replied, his tone gentle. I'm sorry, Mr. Jensen. Your timeline, the world you knew, only had a few years left before the conflict began. Jensen's augmented hands gripped the chair's armrests, synthetic muscles tightening involuntarily. Megan. Seraph. Pritchard. Malik. Everyone he'd known, everyone he'd tried to protect, they'd all lived through or died in a nuclear apocalypse that occurred just years after his displacement. What started it? He forced the words out through a throat that felt constricted. Multiple factors, Cisco said. Resource depletion, genetic augmentation conflicts, corporate warfare spiraling into national conflicts, environmental collapse. The historical records from that period are fragmented, much was lost in the war itself. But humanity survived. First contact with the Vulcans in 2063 changed everything. We unified, eliminated poverty and hunger, abandoned currency-based economics, and focused on exploration and scientific advancement. First contact. Jensen's tactical mind struggled to process the information. Aliens. You're telling me aliens made first contact with Earth? The Vulcans, Bashir confirmed. A logical, peaceful species who helped humanity rebuild and eventually join the interstellar community. That's how the Federation began, an alliance of worlds dedicated to peaceful exploration, scientific discovery, and mutual cooperation. Jensen's augmented vision tracked each speaker, analyzing biosigns for deception indicators despite the social enhancer's limited functionality. But everything suggested they were telling the truth, or at least what they believed to be the truth. And augmentation? Jensen asked. What happened to people like me? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Bashir's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, and Cisco's pause before responding told Jensen everything he needed to know even before the words came. Genetic augmentation was banned, Cisco stated carefully. The memory of Khan and the Eugenics Wars created legal prohibitions that remain in effect. Cybernetic augmentation for medical necessity is accepted, even common. But voluntary enhancement, especially military-grade modifications like yours, exists in a legal gray area. You're not illegal, Mr. Jensen. But you're not entirely legal either. So I'm an anachronism, Jensen said flatly. A relic from a darker age, carrying technology that makes people uncomfortable. You're a person, Bashir interjected firmly, who deserves the same rights and dignity as anyone else, regardless of how much of you is synthetic. The Federation's laws on augmentation are imperfect. Many of us recognize that. But changing centuries of precedent and fear takes time. Jensen heard the passion in Bashir's voice, the personal investment that went beyond professional courtesy. The doctor had his own story regarding augmentation, Jensen was certain of it. Cisco stood, moving to the viewport. Here's my assessment, Mr. Jensen. You're not a threat to this station or the Federation. You're a displaced person trying to survive in circumstances you never asked for. Dr. Bashir is correct, you deserve fair treatment. But I can't ignore the tactical implications of your presence during wartime. You want to use me, Jensen said. It wasn't a question. I want to offer you options. Cisco turned to face him. You can remain in protective custody while Starfleet's temporal specialists investigate methods to return you to your proper timeline. That could take months or years, assuming it's even possible. Or you can accept provisional status aboard Deep Space Nine, limited freedom of movement, regular security check-ins with Odo, and the opportunity to contribute your skills where appropriate. In exchange for what? Information and cooperation. If you identify security threats, you report them. If you discover intelligence relevant to the war effort, you share it. And you submit to periodic medical and security evaluations to ensure your augmentations aren't degrading or malfunctioning. Sisko's expression was serious but not unkind. You'd essentially be a civilian consultant with restricted access. Not a prisoner, but not entirely free either. Jensen considered the proposition. Confined freedom was still better than a cell, and cooperative status meant access to information, resources, and potentially allies. His experience with corporate politics had taught him that provisional arrangements could be renegotiated once trust was established. "What about my investigation?" Jensen asked. Odo's eyebrows rose. "Investigation into what?" "Into what happened. To my timeline, to the people I knew, to the conspiracies I was unraveling when I was displaced." "You're telling me I can't go back, that everyone I knew is 3 centuries dead?" "Fine. But I spent 2 years piecing together a conspiracy that went deeper than corporate espionage, the Illuminati, shadow governments, orchestrated terrorism designed to control augmentation's development. I need to know if any of that mattered. If the work I did changed anything or if it all burned in World War III. Sisko exchanged another glance with his officers. "Historical research into classified pre-Federation events falls outside my authority to grant. But civilian access to Federation historical archives is permitted. If you want to spend your time investigating 3-century-old conspiracies, I won't stop you." "Then I accept your offer," Jensen said. "Provisional status, regular check-ins, cooperation with security protocols. But I investigate what happened to my world, and if I find something that connects to current events, I share it. Deal?" Sisko extended his hand across the desk. "Deal. Welcome to Deep Space Nine, Mr. Jensen. Try not to make Odo's job more difficult than it already is." Jensen shook the offered hand, and something in Sisko's grip reminded him of David Seraph, a firm handshake that communicated both respect and warning. These people would give him a chance, but they'd be watching. That was fine. Jensen had spent his entire augmented life being watched. He'd learned to work with it. The quarters assigned to Jensen were located in Deep Space Nine's habitat ring, Section 23. A modest space by Cardassian architectural standards but palatial compared to the Detroit apartment he'd maintained in 2029. The room featured a sleeping alcove, a small dining area with a replicator, a workstation with computer access, and a viewport offering a view of the Bajoran system's rust-colored primary planet. The aesthetic was distinctly alien, angular Cardassian design softened by Federation modifications, creating an uncomfortable hybrid that never quite resolved its identity crisis. Jensen stood at the viewport, his augmented vision analyzing the orbital mechanics of the planet below while his mind processed the past 6 hours. Commander Sisko had been true to his word. Provisional status came with limited computer access, permission to move freely through public areas of the station, and a communication device that doubled as a tracking beacon. Odo's security protocols were thorough but not oppressive. Regular check-ins every 12 hours, biometric monitoring through the station's internal sensors, and restricted access to sensitive areas like operations, engineering substations, and the docking ring's secured sections. It was surveillance disguised as freedom, but Jensen had expected nothing less. His fingers moved across the workstation's interface, navigating Federation historical databases with the methodical precision of someone trained to extract intelligence from fragmented information. The computer's voice interface had offered assistance, but Jensen preferred manual searching. It revealed data architecture, access hierarchies, and information patterns that voice queries obscured. Earth's 21st century records were exactly as Bashir had described. Fragmented, incomplete, sanitized by 3 centuries of historical revision. The Eugenics Wars appeared in sanitized summaries that focused on Khan's atrocities while glossing over the genetic research that had created him. World War III merited entire historical volumes, but the pre-war period, Jensen's era, was documented in frustratingly vague terms. Corporate conflicts, resource depletion, social fragmentation. Bland euphemisms that erased the specific conspiracies, the deliberate manipulation, the shadow organizations that had orchestrated so much suffering. Serif Industries appeared in exactly 3 database entries. A footnote in augmentation history, a casualty listing in the Detroit region's war damage assessment, and a single photograph in a museum archive, David Serif standing beside a prototype augmentation cradle, his expression optimistic in a way that Jensen now recognized as tragic naivete. Megan Reed's name didn't appear at all. Jensen's augmented hands clenched involuntarily, synthetic musculature responding to emotional input with mechanical precision. 343 years, and she'd been erased from history. Not even a footnote. Just, gone. The door chime interrupted his thoughts, a soft, melodic tone that seemed designed to be non-threatening. Jensen's tactical protocols engaged automatically, his smart vision activating to scan through the door. One humanoid figure, approximately 175 centimeters tall, biosignature reading human with unusual neurological activity patterns. "Come in," Jensen said, deactivating the smart vision before the door opened. Dr. Bashir entered carrying a medical kit and wearing an expression that suggested this wasn't a casual social visit. "Mr. Jensen. I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to follow up on your initial medical evaluation and discuss something personal." Jensen gestured toward the seating area. "About my augmentations?" "Partially." Bashir settled into a chair, the medical kit resting on his lap. "Your biocell recharge rate is higher than expected. I'd like to run some additional scans to ensure the station's power systems aren't causing any adverse interactions with your cybernetics. But that's not the primary reason I'm here." "Then why are you here, doctor?" Bashir's fingers drummed against the medical kit, a nervous gesture that seemed uncharacteristic for someone with his obvious competence. "Because I understand what it's like to be enhanced against your will and then judged for it by people who don't understand the circumstances." Jensen's augmented hearing detected the subtle acceleration in Bashir's heartbeat, the slight tension in his vocal cords. Whatever the doctor was about to reveal, it carried significant personal risk. "You're augmented," Jensen stated. It wasn't a question. Bashir nodded slowly. "Genetically enhanced. When I was 6 years old, my parents took me to a clinic on Adigen Prime. I was suffering from severe developmental disabilities. Learning difficulties, coordination problems, inability to process complex information. They had me illegally modified. Gene therapy that rewrote my DNA, enhanced my cognitive functions, improved my physical coordination. When I woke up, I was different. Smarter. Faster. Better. And illegal. Completely. If Starfleet discovered the truth, I'd be court-martialed, stripped of my medical license, and potentially imprisoned. My parents would face criminal charges. Everything I've achieved, my medical degree, my position on Deep Space Nine, my contributions to Starfleet Medical. All of it exists because I've hidden what I am for my entire adult life." Jensen studied the doctor carefully, his social enhancer attempting to process the revelation despite its limited functionality. "Why tell me?" "Because you said something earlier that resonated with me. I never asked for this." "Neither did I, Mr. Jensen. My parents made a choice about my body, my future, without my consent. And now I live every day knowing that the Federation, the institution I serve, the principles I believe in, would condemn me for what I've become. Not for anything I've done, but simply for existing." The parallel was obvious, but Jensen had learned that obvious parallels often conceal deeper complexities. Genetic enhancement isn't the same as cybernetic augmentation. Your modifications are invisible. Mine are obvious every time someone looks at me. "True," Bashir acknowledged. "But the prejudice is the same. The fear that enhanced humans will consider themselves superior, that we'll use our advantages to dominate or harm others. Khan's legacy poisons everything, even 3 centuries later. Every enhanced individual carries the burden of his atrocities, regardless of our actual intentions or actions. Jensen moved to the replicator, ordering coffee, a habit from 2029 that the station's database had surprisingly accommodated. The machine hummed, and a cup materialized containing liquid that smelled almost exactly like the coffee from the Serif Industries employee lounge. He took a sip, the familiar taste grounding him in a moment of sensory continuity across 3 centuries. "So you're taking a risk telling me this," Jensen said. "Why?" "Because you're going to face challenges here that you can't anticipate. Starfleet officers who see your augmentations and assume you're dangerous. Civilians who've heard stories about enhanced individuals and project their fears onto you. Odo's security monitoring that, despite his professionalism, carries an undertone of suspicion." Bashir leaned forward. "You need someone who understands what it's like to navigate a society that's fundamentally ambivalent about enhancement. Someone who can warn you about the political landmines before you step on them." Jensen appreciated the tactical assessment, even if he questioned the doctor's motivations. "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" Bashir's expression shifted. "Something between resignation and hope. Honestly. Maybe a friend who doesn't look at me differently when they learn the truth. Maybe someone who understands that being enhanced doesn't make us monsters, just people dealing with circumstances we didn't choose." The sentiment was almost naive in its earnestness, but Jensen's augmented perception detected genuine emotion rather than manipulation. Bashir wasn't playing an angle, he was reaching out, human to human, enhanced to enhanced. "Fair enough," Jensen said finally. "But I'm not good at friendship, Doctor. I spent 2 years investigating conspiracies where everyone was either a suspect or a victim. Trust doesn't come easily. I'm not asking for trust. Not yet." Bashir opened his medical kit, pulling out a medical tricorder. "I'm asking for mutual understanding. You don't report my genetic enhancement, and I help you navigate the social and political complexities of life in the Federation. Consider it a pragmatic alliance between 2 people the universe decided to modify without permission." Jensen sat across from the doctor, extending his arm for the medical scan. "All right, Doctor. But if this alliance involves you trying to study my augmentations for your research, we're going to have a problem." Bashir's tricorder hummed as it analyzed Jensen's biosigns. "I'm a doctor, not a technology scavenger. Your augmentations are your business. Though I will say, from a medical perspective, the integration is fascinating. Whoever designed your enhancement protocols understood human physiology at a level that rivals anything we've achieved in the 24th century. Dr. Reed was brilliant," Jensen said quietly. "She believed augmentation could eliminate human limitations, disease, injury, disability. She saw it as compassionate medicine, not transhuman arrogance. And you? What did you see it as?" Jensen looked down at his augmented hands, remembering the moment he'd first regained consciousness in the Serif Industries medical bay. The disorientation, the horror of discovering his body had been rebuilt, the rage at having his autonomy stripped away in the name of saving his life. "I saw it as theft," Jensen admitted. "They took my body, my choices, and gave me back something I didn't recognize. Serif told me I should be grateful, that I was faster, stronger, better than I'd ever been. But he never asked if I wanted to be better. He just assumed the answer." Bashir's tricorder beeped softly, and the doctor studied the readout with a frown. "Your biocell reserves are fluctuating. Not dangerously, but inconsistently. The station's power grid is charging you faster than your systems can efficiently process. I'd recommend limiting direct exposure to high-energy areas, engineering sections, weapons arrays, the fusion reactor levels." "Noted." Jensen paused, considering his next words carefully. "Bashir, you mentioned political landmines. Give me specifics. What should I watch out for?" The doctor deactivated his tricorder, his expression turning serious. Section 31. Jensen's tactical protocols flagged the term. Cisco had mentioned it briefly during the initial briefing. Intelligence Organization. Officially, Section 31 doesn't exist. Unofficially, they're Starfleet's Black Operations Division. No oversight, no regulations, no ethical constraints. They believe the Federation's ideals are worth protecting by any means necessary, including methods the Federation itself would condemn. Bashir's voice carried undisguised contempt. They've approached me before. Tried to recruit me because of my enhancements. When I refused, they made it clear they'd be watching me. Jensen's experience with shadow organizations immediately recognized the pattern. And you think they'll approach me? I know they will. You're exactly what they look for: enhanced capabilities, tactical training, temporal displacement that gives you no loyalty to existing power structures. They'll offer you resources, information about your past, maybe even assistance returning to your timeline. All in exchange for your cooperation with operations the Federation can't officially sanction. Operations like what? Assassination, sabotage, preemptive strikes against potential threats, experimentation with prohibited technologies. Bashir's jaw tightened. During the Dominion War, they'd become more aggressive. They released a biological weapon designed to genocide the Founders. The Dominion's ruling species. Mass murder disguised as strategic necessity. Jensen processed the information with practiced analytical detachment. Section 31 sounded exactly like the organizations he'd spent years investigating in 2029, the Illuminati, Majestic 12, shadow governments operating beyond legal constraints while justifying atrocities through appeals to security and necessity. You're warning me to refuse them, Jensen said. I'm warning you that they're dangerous. Whether you cooperate or refuse, they'll use you somehow. The question is whether you let them do it on their terms or yours. Bashir stood, returning the tricorder to his medical kit. Be careful, Mr. Jensen. Section 31 doesn't make casual approaches. If they contact you, it's because they've already decided you're either an asset or a liability. The door chimes sounded again, two short tones that Jensen's augmented hearing identified as distinctly different from Bashir's earlier arrival. His smart vision activated automatically, scanning through the door. Humanoid figure. Approximately 180 centimeters. Biosignature reading as human but with unusual quantum fluctuations that didn't match standard biological patterns. Jensen's threat assessment protocols escalated immediately. Expecting someone? Bashir asked, noticing Jensen's tension. No, Jensen moved toward the door, his augmented musculature primed for rapid response. But I'm guessing you know who this is, Doctor. Bashir's expression confirmed Jensen's suspicion even before he spoke. That was faster than I expected. Be very careful what you say, Mr. Jensen. And remember, everything is recorded, everything is analyzed, and nothing is coincidence with them. The door opened to reveal a man in civilian clothing, nondescript gray tunic, no visible rank insignia, no identifying markers. His face was unremarkable, the kind that would disappear in a crowd. But his eyes were sharp, analytical, and carried the cold calculation of someone who measured people in terms of utility and expendability. Mr. Adam Jensen, the man said, his voice pleasant and utterly devoid of genuine warmth. I apologize for the intrusion. My name is Sloan. I represent an organization interested in your unique situation. Might I have a few minutes of your time? Jensen's augmented vision catalogued every detail. The man's heart rate was steady, his biosigns showed no nervousness, his posture communicated confidence bordering on arrogance. This wasn't a recruitment pitch. This was an evaluation. Section 31 had arrived. And judging by Sloan's expression, they'd been waiting for him long before he'd materialized on Deep Space Nine. Jensen didn't invite Sloan inside. Instead, he stepped into the corridor, letting the door close behind him and positioning himself where his augmented vision could monitor both approaches to his quarters. Bashir remained inside, a deliberate choice that allowed the doctor plausible deniability while ensuring someone witnessed whatever came next. Sloane's expression registered the tactical positioning with a slight smile. Cautious. I appreciate that. Speaks to solid operational training. What do you want? Jensen kept his tone neutral, his social enhancer attempting to process micro-expressions despite its limited calibration for 24th century humans. To offer you something no one else on this station can provide, context. Sloane clasped his hands behind his back, the posture casual but his eyes remaining sharp. Commander Sisko gave you the sanitized version. The Federation's official history, complete with its comfortable narratives about humanity overcoming its violent past. But you and I both know that official histories rarely tell the complete truth. And you're offering what? The classified version? I'm offering perspective from someone who understands that maintaining peace requires people willing to do things peacekeepers can't acknowledge. Sloane gestured toward the corridor's observation port. Walk with me, Mr. Jensen. I promise you'll find the conversation enlightening. Every instinct Jensen possessed screamed that accepting the invitation was dangerous. But dangerous didn't always mean wrong, and this man clearly had information worth extracting. Jensen fell into step beside Sloane, maintaining a precise 2-meter distance, close enough for conversation, far enough to respond if the situation deteriorated. They walked through the habitat ring's curved corridors, passing civilians and off-duty Starfleet personnel who seemed oblivious to Sloane's presence. Jensen's augmented hearing caught fragments of conversations, gossip about engineering schedules, complaints about replicator rationing, nervous speculation about Dominion fleet movements near the Cardassian border. You've been researching your timeline, Sloane said conversationally. Searching Federation databases for information about Seraph Industries, the augmentation conflicts, the conspiracies you were investigating. Finding very little, I imagine. Jensen's tactical protocols noted the surveillance implication. Section 31 had been monitoring his computer access. The records are incomplete. Incomplete, sanitized, and in some cases, deliberately falsified. The Federation prefers its history neat and morally unambiguous. The Eugenics Wars become a cautionary tale about genetic hubris. World War III becomes a lesson about the dangers of nationalism and resource competition. The truth. That shadow organizations orchestrated much of the chaos you lived through, that truth is considerably less comfortable. They stopped at an observation port overlooking the promenade. Below, the station's commercial heart pulsed with activity, Ferengi merchants negotiating deals, Bajoran vendors selling religious artifacts, Starfleet personnel grabbing quick meals between duty shifts. Normal life continuing despite the war that raged in the sectors beyond. The Illuminati existed, Sloane continued, his voice low enough that only Jensen's augmented hearing could capture it clearly over the ambient noise. Multiple factions, competing agendas, centuries of accumulated power and influence. By your era, they'd fractured into corporate entities, Taiyong Medical, Belltower Associates, Picus Communications. The names changed, the methods evolved, but the fundamental goal remained consistent. Control human development, manage technological progress, maintain power structures that benefited a select few. Jensen's augmented hands gripped the observation port's railing. You're telling me I was right. That everything I uncovered was absolutely accurate, Sloane confirmed. But also irrelevant. Because World War III didn't destroy the Illuminati, it perfected their methodology. When 600 million people died and human civilization nearly collapsed, the survivors were desperate for order, for structure, for someone to rebuild what had been lost. First contact with the Vulcans provided the catalyst, but the actual reconstruction? That required organization, coordination, and people willing to make difficult decisions. You're saying the Illuminati became the Federation. I'm saying elements of those organizations recognized an opportunity to reshape human civilization according to principles that genuinely improve people's lives. No poverty, no hunger, no currency-driven exploitation. The Federation's ideals aren't propaganda, Mr. Jensen, they're real. But maintaining those ideals requires constant vigilance against threats both external and internal. Jensen turned to face Sloan directly. And that's where Section 31 comes in. The hidden guardians making sure the utopia stays utopian through methods the utopians can't acknowledge. Sloan's smile was thin and utterly humorless. Someone needs to do the work Starfleet captains are too principled to consider. The Dominion doesn't share the Federation's ethical constraints. The Borg don't negotiate. The Romulans see honor and integrity as exploitable weaknesses. Section 31 exists because threats to the Federation don't care about our moral superiority. And you want to recruit me because I'm augmented, trained, and conveniently displaced from any timeline that would give me loyalty conflicts. Jensen's voice carried undisguised skepticism. What's the pitch? Join Section 31, get access to classified historical records about my era, maybe even assistance returning home if I complete enough morally questionable operations. The pitch, Sloan replied, his tone hardening slightly, is that you're already involved whether you want to be or not. Your arrival on Deep Space Nine wasn't random. The Bajoran wormhole doesn't permit random transits, the prophets control access. If you came through, it's because something allowed or wanted you here. Jensen's tactical assessment protocols flagged the implication immediately. You think my displacement was deliberate. I think coincidences during wartime are usually enemy action. You appear carrying military-grade augmentation technology centuries ahead of your timeline's capabilities. You arrived through a strategic choke point during the Dominion War, and your temporal displacement just happens to occur at a moment when the Federation is developing its own enhanced soldier programs. Sloan's eyes narrowed. That's not coincidence, Mr. Jensen. That's pattern. Pattern suggesting what? That someone, or something, wanted 21st century augmentation technology delivered to the 24th century precisely when it would be most strategically valuable. Your cybernetic integration doesn't require genetic modification, doesn't trigger the Federation's augmentation prohibitions, and provides combat capabilities that rival Jem'Hadar soldiers without the Dominion's addiction-based control mechanisms. Jensen processed the theory with practiced analytical detachment. It was paranoid, conspiratorial, and disturbingly plausible. He'd spent 2 years learning that apparent coincidences usually concealed deliberate manipulation. If you're right, then keeping me under observation serves Section 31's interests better than recruitment. Why approach me openly? Because we don't have time for prolonged observation, Sloan admitted. The Dominion War is reaching a critical phase. Casualties are mounting, resources are strained, and Starfleet is desperate for force multipliers. If someone is trying to introduce augmentation technology through you, we need to know who, why, and how to control the outcome. That requires your cooperation, or at minimum, your informed awareness of the situation. A Starfleet security patrol passed nearby, and Sloan's expression shifted to pleasant neutrality until they were out of conversational range. The transformation was seamless. From intelligence operative to casual station resident in the span of a heartbeat. When they were alone again, Jensen spoke quietly. Bashir warned me you'd approach. Told me Section 31 doesn't make casual contact. Dr. Bashir has his own complicated relationship with enhancement and secrecy, Sloan observed. He's right to be cautious. But he's also naive if he thinks maintaining moral purity is possible during a war for survival. The Dominion's biological weapon targeting founders. That was our operation. Condemned by the Federation, investigated by Starfleet, protested by every admiral with a conscience. And yet, if it succeeds, it will end the war and save billions of lives. Sometimes the moral choice is the immoral action. Jensen had heard similar justifications countless times in 2029. Bob Page had used identical rhetoric when explaining why Pankia's global control was necessary. David Serif had made parallel arguments about augmentation's benefits outweighing individual consent. Every conspiracy Jensen had uncovered had been justified by someone claiming they were protecting humanity from itself. I've met people who believed the ends justified the means, Jensen said carefully. Usually right before they tried to kill me for threatening their plans. Sloane's expression remained impassive. I'm not threatening you, Mr. Jensen. I'm providing information and offering resources. What you do with them is your decision. But make no mistake, you're a variable in a complex equation, and variables get resolved one way or another. Cooperation means you maintain some control over the resolution process. Resistance means the universe decides for you. That sounds like a threat disguised as advice. It's a tactical assessment based on 300 years of covert operations experience. Sloane pulled a small data chip from his pocket, offering it to Jensen. This contains unredacted historical records from the early 21st century. Serif Industries' fate, the augmentation conflict's true scope, the organizations you were investigating and what happened to them. Read it. Verify it against Federation databases. And then decide whether maintaining your distance from Section 31 is pragmatic or simply prideful. Jensen stared at the data chip, his augmented vision analyzing its construction. Standard Federation isolinear technology, no detectable surveillance devices or malicious code, though Section 31's capabilities likely exceeded detection methods available to him. He took the chip. This doesn't mean I'm agreeing to anything, Jensen stated flatly. Of course not. It means you're gathering intelligence before making strategic decisions. Exactly what I'd expect from someone with your operational background. Sloane stepped back, his posture relaxing slightly. One more thing, Mr. Jensen. A Vorta diplomatic envoy is arriving on Deep Space Nine tomorrow. His name is Weyoun, and he's one of the Dominion's most effective negotiators. He'll be here under diplomatic immunity to discuss prisoner exchange protocols. Why do I care about Dominion diplomats? Because Weyoun has a particular interest in biological distinctiveness and technological adaptation. Your cybernetic augmentations represent both. The Dominion has been attempting to enhance Jem'Hadar soldiers for years with limited success. Their genetic engineering creates warriors but not strategists. Your integrated augmentation model could provide solutions they've been seeking. Jensen's tactical assessment immediately identified the threat vector. You think the Dominion will try to acquire my augmentation technology? I think Weyoun will attempt to determine whether you represent an opportunity or a threat to Dominion interests. What happens after that depends on his assessment and the Founder's strategic priorities. Sloane's expression was unreadable. Commander Sisko believes diplomatic protocols will protect you. Odo's security measures are thorough. But the Dominion doesn't follow Federation rules, and Vorta are extraordinarily skilled at identifying leverage points. Another reason I should cooperate with Section 31, protection from Dominion interest. Another reason you should understand the complete strategic situation rather than relying on Commander Sisko's reassurances that everything will be fine. Sloane turned to leave, then paused. Dr. Bashir told you I'd approach you. Did he mention that Section 31 has complete documentation of his illegal genetic enhancement? That we've protected him from exposure for years because his medical expertise serves Federation interests. The implication was clear, cooperation secured through leverage rather than loyalty. Jensen's experience with corporate blackmail immediately recognized the pattern. If you're threatening Bashir. I'm illustrating that protection works both ways, Sloane interrupted calmly. We don't expose the doctor because his medical contributions outweigh the legal complications of his enhancement. Similarly, we won't interfere with your presence on Deep Space Nine as long as your activities align with Federation security interests. But if you become a liability, to us, to Starfleet, or to the war effort, then protection becomes considerably more complicated. Sloane walked away without further comment, disappearing into the promenade's crowd with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime being unremarkable. Jensen remained at the observation port, the data chip feeling impossibly heavy in his augmented hand. Below, station life continued its normal rhythm, people going about their business, unaware of the shadow organizations manipulating events from positions of deliberate obscurity. Some things really didn't change across 3 centuries. His quarters door opened as he approached, and Bashir was waiting inside, his expression tense. What did he say? Exactly what you predicted. Recruitment pitch disguised as tactical assessment, veiled threats wrapped in pragmatic advice, and a data chip containing information I can't verify and probably shouldn't trust. Bashir moved to the replicator, ordering 2 glasses of Tarkalian tea without asking if Jensen wanted any. He handed one to Jensen before speaking. Are you going to read it? Jensen inserted the data chip into his quarters computer terminal, the interface displaying a directory of files organized by date, organization, and incident classification. Hundreds of documents, thousands of pages, all claiming to be unredacted historical truth about the era he'd left behind. Yeah, Jensen said quietly, pulling up the first file, Serif Industries, Final Assessment, Detroit Operations, 2029 to 2031. Because whether Sloan's telling the truth or selling me carefully constructed lies, I need to know. And because sitting here pretending I can avoid this situation isn't tactical, it's cowardice. Bashir settled into a chair, his own tea untouched. Then I'll stay. Someone should witness whatever you discover. And if Section 31 is monitoring your reactions, at least you won't be alone when they do. Jensen appreciated the gesture more than he'd admit. He opened the file, and the first lines appeared on the screen. Serif Industries, Catastrophic Failure Analysis. Detroit Manufacturing Facility. August 2029 to March 2031. Casualty Assessment, 847 confirmed dead, 2,341 injured. Corporate dissolution, complete. Contributing factors. Illuminati factional conflict, Humanity Front terrorism, global augmentation prohibition legislation, economic collapse. Jensen's augmented eyes scanned faster than baseline human vision, processing information with mechanical efficiency while his organic mind struggled with the emotional weight of each casualty report, each corporate document, each evidence file documenting the systematic destruction of everything he tried to protect. Outside his viewport, the Badran system's sun cast long shadows across the station's hull. Inside his quarters, Adam Jensen learned exactly how completely the world he'd known had burned. And Section 31 watched every moment, recording his reactions, analyzing his emotional responses, calculating exactly how to use a displaced man's grief as leverage in a war 3 centuries removed from everything he'd lost. The data chip's contents consumed 18 hours of Jensen's time, 18 hours during which he didn't sleep, didn't eat, and barely registered Bashir's eventual departure. His augmented eyes processed document after document, reconstructing the final years of his timeline with forensic precision. Serif Industries had collapsed within 2 years of his displacement. Without Jensen's security expertise and with the augmentation conflicts escalating into outright violence, the company became a target for both the Humanity Front and rival corporations. The Detroit facility, the same building where Jensen had been augmented, where Megan had conducted her research, was destroyed in a coordinated attack that killed 847 people. David Serif survived but died 3 years later during the early stages of World War III, killed not by augmentation prejudice but by a nuclear strike on San Francisco that vaporized 7 million people in 43 seconds. Megan Reed's fate was documented in a single paragraph. She'd continued her research at an undisclosed facility until 2027, when she'd been killed during a Humanity Front raid. The report was clinical, devoid of details about whether she'd suffered, whether she'd seen it coming, whether her final thoughts had been of the augmentation technology she'd pioneered or the man she'd left behind. Jensen's augmented hands trembled slightly as he closed that file, a physiological response his cybernetic control systems couldn't entirely suppress. The Illuminati's dissolution was mapped across decades of documentation. The shadow organization hadn't been destroyed by World War III, it had fragmented into competing factions that spent the war years trying to position themselves for post-conflict dominance. Some had succeeded, embedding themselves into the nascent United Earth government. Others had been hunted down by survivors who remembered exactly who had orchestrated the pre-war chaos. By the time the Vulcans made first contact in 2063, the Illuminati existed only as scattered remnants, individual operatives, legacy protocols, and conspiracy theories that historians dismissed as paranoid fantasy. Section 31's file on its own origins was the most disturbing. The organization claimed direct lineage from several Illuminati successor groups, presenting itself as the philosophical evolution of covert operations. Shadow governance without the corruption, manipulation in service of genuine idealism, conspiracy as defensive necessity rather than exploitative control. Jensen didn't believe it. Organizations that operated in darkness while claiming moral superiority were always lying, if not to others, then to themselves. His computer terminal chimed, Odo's 12-hour check-in. Jensen acknowledged the security protocol with muscle memory, his mind still processing the historical documentation. The changeling's response was brief, acknowledged. Report to security at 1800 hours for biometric update. Standard procedure. Nothing suspicious. But Jensen's tactical instincts, honed through 2 years of corporate conspiracy, recognized patterns in seemingly routine communications. Odo had mentioned Weyoun's diplomatic arrival yesterday. The Vorta envoy was scheduled to dock at 1400 hours. The security check-in was timed to occur after the Dominion diplomat had been aboard for 4 hours. Long enough for Weyoun to gather intelligence about the station's unusual new resident. Jensen stood, his augmented musculature responding smoothly despite 18 hours of stillness. His biocells registered at 91% capacity, the station's ambient power systems providing continuous passive recharge. He activated his smart vision briefly, scanning his quarters for surveillance devices beyond the standard monitoring he'd already identified. Nothing. Which meant either the quarters were clean or Section 31's technology exceeded his detection capabilities. Probably the latter. He replicated a meal, something the computer called chicken korma, that tasted vaguely like food he remembered but with subtle differences that marked it as synthesized rather than naturally grown. The Federation's post-scarcity economy meant nutrition was universally available, but Jensen found himself missing the imperfect authenticity of Detroit street vendors and corporate cafeterias. Another thing lost to time. The door chimed. Jensen's augmented hearing identified the visitor before his smart vision confirmed it. Biosignature reading Bajoran, female, elevated stress hormone suggesting emotional distress or anger. Major Kira. Come in, Jensen said, deactivating his visual augmentations. Kira entered with the controlled fury of someone forcing themselves to remain professional despite wanting to be anything but. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture military straight, but her eyes carried the intensity of someone who'd seen too much suffering and refused to become numb to it. Mr. Jensen. I need to speak with you about the Vorta envoy's arrival. Jensen gestured toward the seating area. I'm guessing this isn't a standard diplomatic briefing. No, Kira remained standing, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture that looked like parade rest but functioned as physical restraint. Weyoun arrived 3 hours ago. His first request, after presenting diplomatic credentials and discussing prisoner exchange protocols, was information about you. Specifically, he wanted to know about your augmentations, your origins, and whether you'd be willing to meet with Dominion scientific personnel. And Commander Sisko's response was diplomatically non-committal. He informed Weyoun that you're a civilian under Federation protection with full rights to decline any meetings. Kira's jaw tightened. Weyoun smiled and said he understood completely. Then he filed a formal request through diplomatic channels for a cultural exchange discussion with you regarding enhancement technology's ethical implications. Jensen processed the strategic maneuvering. The Vorta was using diplomatic protocols as cover for intelligence gathering, framing acquisition interest as academic curiosity. Standard corporate negotiation tactics, establish legitimacy through official channels while pursuing actual objectives through informal pressure. You're here to warn me that accepting the meeting would be dangerous. I'm here to tell you that the Dominion sees people as resources. Useful or expendable, valuable or disposable. Wei-An will be charming, intellectually engaging, and utterly ruthless in identifying how to exploit you. Kira moved closer, her voice dropping to match Jensen's augmented hearing range rather than carrying through the quarters. The Dominion doesn't respect individual autonomy. If Wei-An decides your augmentation technology would benefit the founders, he'll find a way to acquire it. Diplomatic immunity won't protect you if they decide you're worth the political complications. You have personal experience with the Dominion. It wasn't a question, and Kira's expression confirmed it. Bajoran spent 50 years under Cardassian occupation. I was in the resistance, fought, killed, watched friends die fighting for liberation. When the Cardassians finally withdrew and we thought we'd earned peace, the Dominion appeared. Different oppressors, same contempt for anyone they consider inferior. Jensen recognized the particular hatred in her voice, the kind that came from watching power exploit weakness while pretending it was natural order. He'd heard similar tones from augmentation rights activists describing corporate executives who treated augmented workers as property rather than people. I appreciate the warning, Major. But I've dealt with predatory organizations before. Serif Industries, Tai Yong Medical, Bell Tower Associates, corporations that saw augmented humans as experimental subjects and market opportunities. The Dominion might have better technology, but the exploitation patterns are probably identical. With one critical difference, Kira countered. The corporations you dealt with wanted profit. The Dominion wants genetic perfection and absolute control. They won't try to buy your cooperation. They'll engineer situations where your choices become increasingly constrained until cooperation seems like your only option. Then I decline the meeting. Tell Wei-An I'm not interested in cultural exchanges or academic discussions. Kira's expression shifted, surprise followed by something approaching respect. Just like that. Just like that. I didn't survive 2 years of conspiracy by accepting meetings with people whose primary interest is determining how to use me. Jensen moved to the replicator, ordering coffee more from habit than desire. Besides, if Wei-An is as skilled as everyone suggests, declining the meeting will tell him almost as much as accepting it. He'll know I recognize the manipulation, which means he'll adjust his approach. Better to control the transition than let him choose the timing. You think like an operative, Kira observed. I was head of security for a corporation that employed 17,000 people and maintained facilities across 3 continents. Corporate espionage, competitive intelligence, threat assessment, I've been doing this since before your parents were born, Major. 3 centuries doesn't change human nature, and I'm guessing it doesn't change Vorta nature either. Kira almost smiled. No. It really doesn't. She moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Mr. Jensen. I'm glad you're being cautious. Most people who arrive on Deep Space Nine during wartime either become victims or weapons. It's rare to meet someone determined to be neither. After Kira left, Jensen stood at his viewport, watching the station's external activity. Cargo vessels docked and departed, runabouts patrolled the perimeter, and somewhere in that organized chaos, a Dominion diplomatic ship sat in a secured berth with a Vorta envoy analyzing every piece of available intelligence about the station's temporally displaced augmented human. His computer terminal chimed again, incoming message, priority diplomatic channel. Jensen opened it, already knowing who'd sent it. Mr. Jensen. I understand you've declined my request for a cultural exchange discussion. While disappointed, I respect your caution. However, I wonder if you've considered that isolation may serve your interests poorly. The Federation protects you now, but their resources are strained and their commitment to individual liberty sometimes conflicts with practical security concerns. The Dominion offers alternatives. We have advanced biological and cybernetic research facilities that could analyze your unique augmentation integration. We could potentially develop methods to enhance your existing capabilities or repair damage your systems might sustain in this unfamiliar technological environment. In exchange, we'd ask only for your perspective on voluntary enhancement ethics, a topic of significant philosophical interest to the founders. Consider this not as manipulation, but as opportunity. You are alone in a universe that fears what you represent. The Dominion understands enhancement's value rather than condemning it as genetic aberration. I remain available should you wish to discuss further. Weiown. Jensen read the message 3 times, his social enhancer analyzing the linguistic structure despite its limited functionality. Every sentence was carefully constructed. Offering assistance while implying vulnerability, suggesting understanding while creating dependency, framing the Dominion as enlightened alternative to Federation prejudice. It was masterful manipulation, and it would probably work on someone desperate enough to believe they had no other options. Jensen deleted the message without responding. His tactical assessment protocols had already identified the Dominion's leverage points. Isolation, fear of Federation rejection, desire for technological support, and the temptation of enhanced capabilities beyond even his current augmentations. Weiown had evaluated him with remarkable speed and accuracy, constructing an approach specifically calibrated to exploit a displaced person's vulnerabilities. But Weiown had made one critical miscalculation. Jensen had spent 2 years learning that the most dangerous manipulations were the ones that offered exactly what you wanted while hiding the true cost until extraction was impossible. He'd watched Megan be taken, seen Seraph's idealism exploited, witnessed the Humanity Front's justified anger corrupted into terrorism, all because people accepted offers that seemed too perfectly aligned with their needs. The Dominion's proposal was textbook corporate acquisition strategy. Offer support, establish dependency, gradually increase commitment requirements until the target was too invested to withdraw. Jensen had seen it before, and he'd learned to recognize it regardless of which century's vocabulary it used. His computer terminal displayed Odo's security reminder, report to security at 1800 hours. Jensen checked his internal chronometer. 47 minutes. Time enough to prepare. He accessed the station's public database, searching for information about Vorta physiology, Dominion diplomatic protocols, and founder political structure. The data was limited. Starfleet intelligence classifications restricted detailed information, but enough existed in public records to construct a basic threat assessment. Vorta were cloned administrators, genetically engineered for diplomatic manipulation and logistical coordination. They served the founders with absolute loyalty, considering it religious duty rather than employment. They were immune to most poisons, possessed limited telepathic resistance, and could be terminated and replaced if captured or killed, memories transferred to new clones through genetic encoding. They were, essentially, disposable operatives with perfect institutional memory. The implications were tactically significant. Weiown wasn't simply gathering intelligence for immediate use. He was gathering it for the Dominion's collective knowledge base. Any information Jensen revealed, any behavioral pattern Weiown identified, would be permanently archived and available to every future Weiown clone and every founder who accessed Dominion intelligence databases. One conversation could create vulnerabilities that persisted indefinitely. Jensen's augmented mind cataloged the threat vector, filed it appropriately, and adjusted his tactical protocols. The Dominion wouldn't acquire information through direct engagement, which meant they'd attempt acquisition through observation, monitoring, or exploitation of existing relationships. Section 31 had warned him this would happen. Which raised the uncomfortable question of whether Section 31 had simply predicted Dominion behavior or actively encouraged it to create circumstances where Jensen's cooperation became strategically necessary. Conspiracy within conspiracy, manipulation layered over manipulation. Some things really were universal constants. Jensen left his quarters precisely on time, his augmented internal chronometer synchronized with the station's timekeeping systems. The walk to Odo's security office took him through the promenade's commercial district, past Quark's bar where Ferengi gambling and Bajoran commerce created controlled chaos, past the Replimat where off-duty personnel grabbed quick meals, past the Bajoran temple where Major Kira often spent her off-duty hours seeking guidance from her prophets. Normal station life. People living, working, trying to maintain routine despite the war that threatened everything they'd built. Jensen's augmented hearing caught a fragment of conversation from a nearby table, two Starfleet officers discussing casualty reports from the Cardassian border, their voices carrying the exhaustion of people who'd been fighting too long. Another 12 ships lost this week. The Dominion's pressing harder every month. At this rate, we'll run out of ships before they run out of Jem'Hadar. The war was real. The threat was genuine. And Jensen was caught in the middle of it, carrying augmentation technology that multiple factions wanted to exploit for competing purposes. He'd been here before, metaphorically. Different players, same power dynamics. The question was whether this time, 3 centuries removed from everything he'd known, he could find a path that didn't end with him being used as a weapon in someone else's war. Odo's security office was located adjacent to the promenade's main concourse, a strategic position allowing rapid response to incidents throughout the commercial district. The changeling looked up from his desk as Jensen entered, his expression carrying its characteristic dour skepticism. "Mr. Jensen. Punctual. I appreciate that." Odo gestured toward the bio bed in the corner. "Standard biometric update. Dr. Bashir will be here shortly to ensure your augmentations aren't experiencing degradation or malfunction." Jensen complied, settling onto the bio bed while his augmented vision scanned the security office's interior. Multiple monitoring displays showed various station sections, security alerts scrolled across dedicated terminals, and a weapons locker stood against the far wall. Fully stocked with phaser rifles and personal force field generators. Odo was prepared for multiple threat scenarios simultaneously. "Major Kira informed me you declined Weiaun's meeting request," Odo said, reviewing data on his terminal. "Wise decision. The Vorta has been persistent in his inquiries about you." "Persistent how?" "Requesting information through diplomatic channels, attempting to access your Federation records, which don't exist since you're from before the Federation was founded, and making casual inquiries to station personnel about your movements and interactions." Odo's expression hardened. "I've informed him that surveillance of Federation civilians violates diplomatic protocols." He apologized profusely and continued doing exactly what he'd been doing before. "So he's monitoring me anyway, just more discreetly." "Almost certainly. Weiaun is many things, but subtle isn't always one of them. If he wants information about you, he'll acquire it through whatever means he deems necessary while maintaining plausible deniability about Dominion involvement." Bashir arrived carrying his medical kit, his expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Jensen. How are your augmentations functioning?" "Nominal. Biocell reserves are staying at 90% or above with the station's passive recharge. No system errors, no degradation in augmentation response times." Bashir activated his medical tricorder, scanning Jensen's biosigns with practiced efficiency. "Remarkable. Your cellular integration is actually improving, your organic systems are adapting to the station's environmental conditions faster than I'd anticipated. Whatever immune response variations you possess, they're extraordinarily efficient. That's what made me valuable to Seraph Industries," Jensen said quietly. "My body doesn't reject augmentations. It integrates them as if they were natural tissue. Which makes you," a new voice said from the doorway, "extraordinarily interesting from a biological research perspective." Weiaun stepped into the security office, his smile pleasant and his eyes calculating. The Vorta wore civilian clothing in muted colors, his posture unthreatening but his presence immediately dominating the room's attention. Odo stood, his expression darkening. "Weiaun. You weren't invited to this medical examination." "My apologies, Constable. I was simply passing by and noticed Mr. Jensen entering your office. I thought perhaps this might be an opportune moment for a brief introduction, given that formal meetings have proven difficult to arrange." Weiaun's attention focused on Jensen with laser intensity. "Mr. Adam Jensen. I'm Weiaun, diplomatic representative of the Dominion. It's truly fascinating to meet someone whose very existence challenges so many Federation assumptions about enhancement technology. Jensen remained seated on the biobed, his augmented vision analyzing Weion's biosignature. Elevated neurotransmitter activity, consistent with genetic modifications for enhanced cognitive processing. Cardiovascular system showing efficiency markers beyond baseline human norms. The Vorta was himself a product of enhancement, genetically engineered for his specific role. Weion, Jensen acknowledged neutrally. I received your message. My answer hasn't changed. Of course, of course. I respect that completely. Weion moved closer, his movements fluid and unthreatening. But I wonder if you've fully considered the implications of your unique situation. You're alone in an unfamiliar universe, carrying technology that makes many people uncomfortable. The Federation offers protection, but protection often comes with constraints. Expectations. Limitations on what you're permitted to become. Weion, Odo interjected sharply, if you're attempting to recruit a Federation civilian. I'm simply engaging in conversation, Constable. Diplomatic dialogue is my function, after all. Weion's smile never wavered. Mr. Jensen, the founders have immense respect for beings who transcend their natural limitations. Your augmentations represent a form of voluntary evolution, choosing to become more than biology alone would permit. That philosophy aligns quite closely with Dominion ideals. Jensen stood, his augmented musculature moving with controlled precision. He was taller than Weion by 7 centimeters, and he used the height differential deliberately. I didn't choose my augmentations, Jensen said quietly. They were forced on me to save my life after a terrorist attack. Everything I've become since then has been about learning to live with choices other people made about my body without my consent. So no, Weion, my existence doesn't align with your ideals. It's a reminder that enhancement without consent is just another form of violation. Weion's expression flickered, surprise, perhaps, or recalculation. An interesting perspective. The founders would find that philosophical distinction fascinating. The founders can find it fascinating from a distance. I'm not interested in being studied, recruited, or discussed as a biological curiosity. Jensen moved toward the door, forcing Weion to step aside. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a security check-in to complete. He walked past the Vorta without looking back, his augmented hearing catching Odo's voice as he left the security office. Weion, if you approach Mr. Jensen again without authorization, I will consider it harassment of a Federation civilian and respond accordingly. Understood, Constable. Though I suspect Mr. Jensen and I will have further conversations eventually. The universe has a way of bringing interesting people together, doesn't it? Jensen kept walking, his tactical protocols identifying the implicit threat beneath Weion's pleasant tone. The Dominion wouldn't stop with one declined meeting. They'd simply adjust their approach and try again. And somewhere in the shadows, Section 31 was watching both sides maneuver, calculating how to exploit the situation for Federation advantage. Jensen had escaped corporate conspiracies in 2029 only to find himself caught in their 300 years evolved descendants. Some things, it seemed, were truly universal. 3 days after Weion's uninvited introduction, Jensen established what passed for routine on Deep Space Nine. Mornings involved physical conditioning in the station's gym facilities. His augmented strength drew attention from Starfleet personnel, but he kept the displays minimal, focusing on maintaining operational capacity rather than demonstrating capability. Afternoons were spent in his quarters analyzing Section 31's historical data, cross-referencing it against Federation public records, and identifying the patterns of truth and manipulation woven through both sources. Evenings, he walked the promenade. The commercial district's chaos provided useful cover for surveillance detection. His augmented hearing could isolate conversations across 30 meters of ambient noise, his smart vision could track biosignatures through crowds, and his social enhancer, gradually adapting to 24th-century human behavioral patterns, was beginning to parse emotional states with increasing accuracy. He'd identified 4 separate individuals conducting surveillance over the past 72 hours. 2 were Odo's security personnel, obvious, professional, maintaining observation protocols without attempting concealment. The third was almost certainly Section 31, a human male who appeared in different clothing configurations but maintained identical biosignature markers and movement patterns that suggested tactical training. The fourth was more concerning. A Ferengi merchant who operated a data services kiosk near Quark's bar had been monitoring Jensen's movements with equipment that registered on electromagnetic sensors as considerably more sophisticated than standard commercial scanning devices. The Ferengi, Brolock, according to the kiosk's business license, maintained perfect commercial cover, but his observation patterns were too consistent, his positioning too strategic. Jensen had seen corporate intelligence operatives use identical techniques in 2029. Tonight, he decided to address the situation directly. The promenade's evening crowd was substantial. Off-duty Starfleet personnel, Bajoran civilians, visiting merchants from a dozen species, and the usual collection of gamblers, socializers, and people seeking distraction from the war's grinding pressure. Jensen moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his augmented reflexes automatically adjusting his path to avoid collisions while his tactical protocols mapped optimal approach vectors. He stopped at Brolock's data services kiosk, examining the displayed merchandise with apparent casual interest. Isolinear chips, data storage devices, communication encryption services, standard commercial offerings for a station that served as a strategic military and commercial hub. Welcome, welcome. Brolock's voice carried the enthusiastic tone of a merchant identifying potential profit. I am Brolock, proprietor of the finest data services on Deep Space Nine. Perhaps you require secure communication protocols. Data storage solutions. I offer very competitive rates, especially for new customers. Jensen's augmented vision analyzed the kiosk's interior while maintaining eye contact. Multiple concealed scanning devices, encrypted communication equipment that exceeded commercial specifications, and a sophisticated computer terminal disguised as inventory management hardware. I'm looking for information, Jensen said quietly. About who's been monitoring me and why. Brolock's expression shifted, the commercial enthusiasm flickering before stabilizing into calculating assessment. Monitoring? I'm afraid I don't understand. I sell data services, not surveillance. Jensen leaned closer, his voice dropping to a frequency his augmented hearing could project precisely to Brolock's ears without carrying beyond the kiosk. You've been tracking my movements for 3 days. Electromagnetic scanning equipment concealed in your kiosk's inventory display. Communication protocols that encrypt outgoing transmissions with military-grade algorithms. Either you're working for someone who wants information about me, or you're conducting intelligence operations that violate station commerce regulations. Either way, we're having this conversation. The Ferengi's eyes widened, and for several seconds he seemed to be calculating profit versus risk ratios with visible intensity. Finally, he gestured toward the back of his kiosk. Perhaps we should discuss this more privately. I have a small office area. Very discreet. Jensen followed Brolock into the cramped space behind the kiosk's public displays. The office was barely 2 meters square, dominated by computer terminals and communication equipment that confirmed Jensen's assessment. This was an intelligence operation disguised as commercial enterprise. Brolock sat behind his desk, fingers steepled in a gesture Jensen recognized from countless corporate negotiations. You're very observant, Mr. Jensen. Most people don't notice my supplementary business activities. Most people don't have augmented sensory capabilities. Who hired you? I'm afraid client confidentiality is a cornerstone of Ferengi business ethics. Jensen's arm blade extended with a smooth metallic whisper, the reinforced titanium alloy stopping precisely 3 centimeters from Brolock's throat. The Ferengi froze, his eyes crossing slightly as he tried to focus on the blade's edge. Let me rephrase, Jensen said calmly. I've been monitored by Section 31, Odo's security personnel, and now apparently by a Ferengi intelligence broker who thinks I won't notice electromagnetic scanning equipment. I'm tired of being watched, analyzed, and treated like a strategic asset rather than a person. So you're going to tell me who hired you, what information you've collected, and who you've reported to. Or I'm going to report you to Odo, who I'm guessing would be very interested in learning about unauthorized surveillance operations on his station. Brolock swallowed carefully, trying not to move his throat closer to the blade. You wouldn't. Odo and I have an understanding. I provide information about criminal activities on the station. He overlooks my more creative interpretations of commerce regulations. Then Odo will be disappointed to learn his informant has been conducting unauthorized surveillance of a Federation civilian under his protection. I'm sure that conversation will go very well for you. The Ferengi's expression crumbled into resignation. Rule of acquisition number 17, a contract is a contract is a contract, but only between Ferengi. I was hired by an intermediary who represented interests concerned about your augmentation technology. They wanted detailed biosignature scans, behavioral analysis, and assessment of your tactical capabilities. Jensen retracted the arm blade slowly. Intermediary for who? Section 31. The Dominion? I don't know. The intermediary was Iridian, the information broker I've dealt with before. He paid in latinum, provided scanning specifications, and requested weekly reports. I never met the actual client. That's how these arrangements work, layers of separation protecting both parties. What information have you reported? Brolock pulled up files on his terminal with trembling fingers. Biosignature analysis confirming your cybernetic integration. Behavioral patterns suggesting military tactical training. Observations that you avoid crowds when possible, maintain constant environmental awareness, and demonstrate threat assessment protocols consistent with security operations personnel. He paused, his voice dropping. And one anomaly that my client found particularly interesting. What anomaly? Your augmentations are adapting. The biosignature scans I took 3 days ago show different energy efficiency patterns than scans from yesterday. Your cybernetic systems are optimizing themselves to the station's technological environment. Whoever designed your augmentations included adaptive protocols that allow real-time evolution. Jensen processed the information with tactical detachment while his organic mind dealt with the implications. His augmentations were evolving without his conscious input, learning, adapting, optimizing. It explained the improved biocell efficiency, the seamless integration with the station's power systems, the gradual enhancement of his sensory processing capabilities. Dr. Reed had built adaptive functionality into his augmentations. Even 3 centuries in the future, her work continued developing beyond its original parameters. Send a message to your intermediary, Jensen instructed. Tell them you've been compromised and the surveillance operation is terminated. Then delete all data you've collected about me and cease monitoring activities. But the contract is now void. You've been discovered by your target, which means your value as an intelligence asset is compromised. Your client will understand. And if they don't, that's not my problem. Jensen leaned against the office's cramped wall. One more thing. When your client contacts you demanding explanation, and they will, I want to know who they are. You're going to trace the communication back to its origin and provide me that information. Brolock's expression shifted to something between terror and entrepreneurial calculation. That would be extremely dangerous. If my client discovers I've betrayed their identity, then you'd better make sure they don't discover it. Because if you refuse, I report you to Odo. If you cooperate, you get to continue your profitable arrangement with station security while avoiding very uncomfortable questions about unauthorized surveillance. Jensen moved toward the office exit. Contact me when you have the information. And Brolock. If you're considering warning your client about this conversation, remember that I found you once. I can find you again. He left the kiosk without waiting for a response, his augmented hearing tracking Brolock's elevated heart rate and stressed breathing patterns. The Ferengi would cooperate, self-interest was a reliable motivator, and Brolock's entire operation depended on maintaining his position on the station. Jensen continued his walk through the promenade, his tactical protocols noting that the Section 31 operative who'd been maintaining surveillance had vanished from the crowd. Either coincidental timing or Brolock's interrogation had been monitored remotely. Probably the latter. His quarters door opened automatically as he approached, interior lights activating to comfortable levels. Jensen moved to his workstation, pulling up the station's public communication logs. If Brolock's client was operating through intermediaries, there would be patterns in the data traffic, encrypted transmissions, routing anomalies, communication timing that suggested coordination. The search took 14 minutes and revealed exactly what Jensen had suspected. Encrypted transmissions had been departing the station every third day for the past week, routed through multiple relay stations before reaching a destination that Federation databases identified as unknown, Gamma Quadrant. The transmission protocols matched Dominion encryption standards, but with variations that suggested either unauthorized modification or deliberately obfuscated origin coding. Weian was collecting intelligence through proxy surveillance, maintaining diplomatic deniability while gathering detailed information about Jensen's capabilities and adaptation patterns. The Vorta's earlier approach had been reconnaissance, assessing whether direct recruitment was viable. When Jensen had declined engagement, Weian had shifted to alternative intelligence collection methods. Standard corporate intelligence strategy. If primary approaches failed, establish secondary observation networks and wait for opportunities. Jensen was considering how to leverage this information when his door chime activated. His smart vision showed two figures outside, human biosignatures, one reading as Commander Sisko, the other as Chief O'Brien. He opened the door, and Sisko's expression immediately communicated that this wasn't a routine visit. "Mr. Jensen. We need to talk. Now." Jensen gestured them inside, his tactical protocols escalating threat assessment levels. Sisko and O'Brien both carried hand phasers, not drawn, but present in ways that suggested they'd expected potential conflict. "What's happened?" Jensen asked. O'Brien pulled out a PADD, displaying technical schematics that Jensen's augmented vision immediately recognized as station power distribution networks. "Someone's been accessing the station's EPS grid through unauthorized interface points. Small power drains, nothing that would trigger standard monitoring systems, but enough to charge high-capacity energy storage systems. We traced the access points and found something disturbing." He pulled up another schematic, this one showing Jensen's quarters with glowing markers indicating multiple connection points. "The unauthorized access is coming from your location," Sisko said, his voice carefully neutral. Chief O'Brien detected the pattern during routine maintenance. "Someone in these quarters has been directly tapping into the station's power systems for the past 4 days." Jensen's augmented mind immediately identified the implication. His biocells had been charging at elevated rates, his augmentation efficiency had been improving beyond expected parameters, and his cybernetic systems had been adapting with unusual speed. Because something had been actively feeding power to his augmentations without his knowledge or consent. "I haven't been consciously accessing your power systems," Jensen stated. "But my augmentations have adaptive protocols. If they detected available energy sources and determined integration was beneficial. Then your cybernetic systems have been acting autonomously," O'Brien interrupted. "That's exactly what worries us. You're essentially a walking computer network with self-modifying code and direct access to the station's primary power grid. If your augmentations are adapting without your conscious control, what else might they do?" Sisko's expression was serious but not hostile. "Dr. Bashir briefed me on your medical evaluation. He emphasized that your augmentations are integrated at the cellular level, that the boundary between your organic and synthetic systems is essentially non-existent. But that integration also means you might not be fully aware of everything your augmentations are doing. Jensen's tactical assessment protocols ran rapid analysis while his organic mind dealt with the uncomfortable realization that Cisco was absolutely correct. His augmentations operated semi-autonomously, threat detection activated without conscious thought, his Titan shield could engage automatically if his systems detected incoming weapons fire, his smart vision adjusted lighting sensitivity without deliberate input. Dr. Reed had designed his augmentations to function as extensions of his nervous system, responding to his intentions and situational requirements with minimal conscious control. Which meant they could also act on parameters he hadn't explicitly authorized. "What do you want me to do?" Jensen asked quietly. "Dr. Bashir is standing by in the infirmary," Cisco replied. "We need to run comprehensive diagnostics on your augmentation systems. Identify what adaptive protocols are active, what parameters they're operating under, and whether they pose any risk to station systems or personnel. This isn't an accusation, Mr. Jensen, it's a safety evaluation. And if you determine my augmentations are too dangerous?" O'Brien glanced at Cisco before responding. "Then we work together to establish safeguards. Biometric limiters, access restrictions, regular monitoring protocols. We're not going to deactivate your augmentations or confine you to quarters. But we need to understand what we're dealing with." Jensen recognized the diplomatic phrasing. They absolutely would confine him if the diagnostics revealed something sufficiently concerning. But Cisco was offering cooperation before coercion, which was more consideration than most organizations had shown him. "All right," Jensen agreed. "Let's find out what my augmentations have been doing without my knowledge." They proceeded to the infirmary in tense silence, and Jensen's augmented hearing caught fragments of conversation from station personnel they passed. News of the unauthorized power access had spread through security channels, and speculation was running wild. "Heard he's some kind of Borg hybrid. Cybernetic systems taking over station computers. Section 31 probably brought him here as some kind of weapon." Jensen kept his expression neutral, but his social enhancer registered the fear and suspicion underlying every conversation. He'd experienced identical reactions in 2029, people seeing his augmentations and immediately assuming threat, danger, inhuman corruption. 3 centuries hadn't changed that fundamental prejudice. Bashir was waiting in the infirmary with sophisticated diagnostic equipment arranged around the primary biobed. His expression was professionally neutral, but Jensen detected concern beneath the doctor's controlled demeanor. "Mr. Jensen. Please lie down. This will take approximately 30 minutes and will involve comprehensive scanning of your neural interfaces, cybernetic control systems, and biocell energy distribution networks." Jensen complied, settling onto the biobed while Bashir activated the diagnostic scanners. The equipment hummed at frequencies his augmented hearing could detect across multiple spectral ranges, electromagnetic, acoustic, quantum resonance patterns that probed his cybernetic systems with uncomfortable precision. Cisco and O'Brien observed from the infirmary's monitoring station, their expressions unreadable. "Your augmentations are remarkably sophisticated," Bashir murmured as data scrolled across his displays. "Neural interface protocols that rival anything Starfleet Medical has developed. Adaptive learning algorithms built into your control systems. And, oh." The doctor's tone shifted, and Jensen's threat assessment protocols escalated immediately. "What?" Bashir looked up from his terminal, his expression troubled. "Your augmentations aren't just adapting to the station's technology. They're actively interfacing with it. Your cybernetic systems have established wireless connections to 47 separate computer terminals, 8 communication nodes, and the station's primary sensor array. You've essentially networked yourself into Deep Space Nine's infrastructure without conscious awareness." The revelation hit Jensen like physical impact. His augmentations had been establishing unauthorized system connections, integrating him into the station's computer network, creating access pathways he hadn't requested or authorized. "Can you disable the connections?" Cisco's voice was carefully controlled. "I can try, but, Bashir's fingers moved across his console, and suddenly Jensen's augmented vision exploded with error messages. Network connection interrupted. System synchronization lost. Re-establishing interface protocols. Warning, environmental data feed terminated. His cybernetic systems fought against the disconnection, autonomously attempting to restore the connections Bashir had severed. Jensen forced conscious control over the automatic responses, manually overriding the reconnection protocols through pure will and his neural interface's command architecture. The effort felt like holding his breath underwater, physically possible but fundamentally contrary to every instinct his augmented body possessed. "They're trying to reconnect," Bashir reported. "Mr. Jensen is manually suppressing the reconnection attempts, but the autonomous protocols are persistent." O'Brien stepped forward, his engineer's mind clearly analyzing the technical implications. It's like his augmentations are treating the station's computer network as an extension of his own systems. They're trying to integrate external data feeds to enhance his situational awareness and operational capabilities. "Which means," Cisco said slowly, "that Mr. Jensen's augmentations could potentially access classified information, monitor secure communications, or even interface with critical station systems if left unchecked." Jensen maintained manual override on his reconnection protocols while forcing words through gritted teeth. "Not intentional. Never authorized network integration." "I believe you," Bashir said, adjusting his diagnostic scans. "But intention doesn't matter if the result is unauthorized access to secure systems. We need to establish hard barriers, technical limitations that prevent your augmentations from establishing connections without your explicit conscious authorization." "How?" Jensen asked. O'Brien moved to a secondary terminal, pulling up technical schematics. "We could install biometric control chips, subcutaneous implants that require conscious neural authorization before your augmentations can establish external connections. It wouldn't limit your internal cybernetic functions, but it would prevent autonomous network integration." "Surgery," Jensen said flatly. "Minor procedure. 30 minutes under local anesthetic, 48 hours recovery time." Bashir's expression was sympathetic. "I know you've had enough unwanted modifications to your body, Mr. Jensen. But this is necessary if you want to maintain freedom of movement on the station. Otherwise, Starfleet Command will classify you as a security threat and mandate confinement." Jensen's augmented mind ran rapid cost-benefit analysis. More surgery, more modifications, more people making decisions about his body without his full consent. But the alternative was imprisonment, and prison meant losing what little autonomy he'd managed to preserve. "Do it," Jensen said. "But I'm conscious during the procedure. Full sensory awareness, no anesthetic beyond localized pain management. I want to know exactly what you're installing and how it functions." Cisco nodded slowly. "Agreed. Chief O'Brien will document the entire procedure and provide you complete technical specifications. This is about establishing trust, Mr. Jensen. Not about controlling you." The surgery took 47 minutes. Jensen's augmented vision watched every moment, his smart vision analyzing the biometric control chips as O'Brien installed them at key neural interface junctions. The devices were elegant in their simplicity, organic synthetic hybrid circuits that interrupted his augmentation's autonomous connection protocols, requiring conscious neural authorization before external interface establishment. When Bashir sealed the final incision, Jensen's augmented systems felt fundamentally different. Not diminished, but constrained. Controlled. For the first time since his initial augmentation in 2029, his cybernetics felt like tools he wielded rather than autonomous systems that operated according to their own parameters. "How do you feel?" Bashir asked. Jensen sat up slowly, running internal diagnostics. His augmentations responded normally to conscious commands, but the persistent background sensation of environmental data feeds had vanished. The station's computer network was no longer accessible without deliberate effort. "Quieter," Jensen replied. Like someone turned off background noise I didn't realize was there. Cisco approached, his expression serious but not unkind. "Mr. Jensen, I want to be clear about something. This wasn't about limiting you, it was about protecting both you and this station. Your augmentations are powerful tools, but tools need safeguards. Especially during wartime when uncertainty gets people killed." "I understand, Commander. And I appreciate the opportunity to maintain autonomy rather than being confined." Jensen stood, his augmented musculature compensating automatically for the minor surgery's effects. "But I need something from you in return." "Which is?" "Information about who's been surveilling me through proxy operations. Weioun's been collecting intelligence through intermediary sources, Ferengi information brokers conducting unauthorized monitoring. I confronted one tonight. He confirmed Dominion interest but couldn't identify the specific client." Cisco and O'Brien exchanged glances, and Jensen's social enhancer registered something between concern and resigned acknowledgement. "We've been monitoring Dominion intelligence activities," Cisco admitted. "Weioun's been more active than typical diplomatic envoys, but we haven't had evidence of specific operational breaches. If you can provide details." "I can provide the Ferengi broker who'll testify to unauthorized surveillance in exchange for immunity from prosecution." Jensen moved toward the infirmary exit. "But I want something in return. Full briefing on Dominion capabilities, current war status, and Section 31's operational interest in me. I'm tired of being a variable in everyone else's equations. I want to understand the complete strategic situation." Cisco considered this for several seconds before nodding. "Tomorrow morning. 0900 hours in my office. Full briefing, classified material included." "But Mr. Jensen, once you have that information, you become responsible for it. Loose lips get people killed, and I won't tolerate security breaches regardless of your unique circumstances." "Understood, Commander." Jensen left the infirmary, his newly constrained augmentations processing the past hour's revelations with methodical precision. His cybernetics had been operating beyond his awareness, establishing connections he hadn't authorized, adapting in ways Dr. Reed had never explicitly described. And somewhere in the station's secure docking bay, Weioun was collecting that intelligence, analyzing his adaptive capabilities, and reporting to the founders about technology that could revolutionize Dominion enhancement protocols. The question was whether Jensen could leverage that interest into strategic advantage or whether he'd simply become another casualty of conspiracies he couldn't fully understand. His quarters felt different when he returned, less connected, more isolated. The sensation of environmental awareness his augmentations had been providing through unauthorized network integration had disappeared, replaced by purely biological and authorized cybernetic sensory input. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like amputation. Jensen stood at his viewport, watching the Badron system stars, and wondered whether Dr. Reed had anticipated this. Whether she'd built adaptive protocols knowing they would eventually force him to choose between augmented capability and human autonomy. Knowing Megan, she probably had. And knowing himself, he'd choose autonomy every time, regardless of what it cost him. Some things were worth more than efficiency. Even if 3 centuries of technological evolution hadn't figured that out yet. The briefing room adjacent to Commander Cisco's office was designed for classified strategic discussions, reinforced bulkheads, electromagnetic shielding preventing external surveillance, and a holographic display system capable of projecting tactical data with extraordinary precision. When Jensen arrived at precisely 0900 hours, the senior staff was already assembled. Cisco sat at the head of the conference table. Major Kira occupied the tactical position to his right, her posture radiating controlled tension. Odo stood near the door, his expression characteristically skeptical. Chief O'Brien managed the holographic display controls, while Dr. Bashir sat with a PADD containing what Jensen's augmented vision identified as medical intelligence assessments. And in the corner, almost invisible in his studied neutrality, sat Sloan. Jensen's threat assessment protocols escalated immediately, but he kept his expression neutral as he took the offered seat across from Sisko. "Mr. Jensen," Sisko began without preamble, "what you're about to hear is classified at the highest levels of Starfleet intelligence. Disclosure to unauthorized personnel is a court-martial offense. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Good." Sisko nodded to O'Brien, and the holographic display activated, showing a three-dimensional map of the Alpha Quadrant with tactical overlays indicating fleet positions, contested territories, and strategic installations. The Dominion War began 2 years ago when the Dominion, a Gamma Quadrant power, invaded the Alpha Quadrant through the Bajoran wormhole. Their objective is complete territorial control, enforced through military superiority and genetic subjugation. They're led by the Founders, a species of shapeshifters who view all solid species as inherently inferior. The display zoomed to show Dominion-controlled territory, a spreading crimson stain across the galactic map that had consumed dozens of star systems. "The Dominion's primary military force is the Jem'Hadar," Kira continued, her voice carrying the hard edge of someone who'd fought them personally. "Genetically engineered soldiers, created in birthing facilities and programmed with absolute loyalty to the Founders. They're addicted to a substance called ketracel white that only the Dominion can provide, ensuring complete control. They're also augmented, enhanced strength, accelerated healing, limited teleportation capability, and absolutely no fear of death." Jensen studied the tactical data with professional interest. The Jem'Hadar reminded him of Beltawa Associates' augmented security forces, corporate soldiers enhanced beyond baseline human capacity and conditioned for absolute obedience. The Dominion also employs the Vorta as administrative and diplomatic personnel, Odo added. Weyoun is one of several clones. If he's killed, his memories transfer to the next clone through genetic encoding. This makes conventional intelligence operations against them extremely difficult. They have perfect institutional memory and can be terminated without meaningful loss of operational capability. The holographic display shifted to show recent battle statistics, casualty numbers, destroyed vessels, occupied planets. The data was sobering. Federation losses were mounting, resources were strained, and victory was far from certain. Current projections, O'Brien said quietly, suggest the war could last another 3 to 5 years if current engagement patterns continue. But we're not sure the Federation can sustain operations that long. Ship construction rates are barely keeping pace with losses, personnel casualties are creating experience gaps in critical positions, and the economic strain is testing the Federation's post-scarcity infrastructure. Which brings us to why you're here, Sisko said, his attention focusing entirely on Jensen. The Dominion has been attempting to enhance Jem'Hadar capabilities since the war began. Improved tactical cognition, advanced strategic thinking, reduced dependence on ketracel white. They've had limited success. The genetic engineering that makes Jem'Hadar effective soldiers also limits their adaptability and independent thought. And they think my augmentation model solves that problem, Jensen concluded. Precisely. Sloan spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the calculated precision of an intelligence analyst. Your cybernetic integration provides enhanced capabilities without genetic modification. More importantly, your augmentations adapt and improve autonomously, exactly what the Dominion needs to overcome Jem'Hadar's inherent limitations. If they acquire your augmentation technology and successfully integrate it with Jem'Hadar biology, they'll create soldiers that combine genetic enhancement's physical advantages with cybernetic augmentation's tactical flexibility. The strategic implications were immediately obvious. Enhanced Jem'Hadar would represent a force multiplier that could decisively shift the war's balance. How close are they to reverse engineering the technology? Jensen asked. Unknown, Odo replied. Weyoun's surveillance operations have been focused on collecting biosignature data and behavioral analysis. He hasn't attempted direct acquisition, yet. But the pattern suggests he's building a comprehensive intelligence profile before making operational recommendations to the Founders. Jensen's augmented mind processed the tactical situation with mechanical precision. The Dominion wanted his technology but hadn't yet determined the optimal acquisition method. Weyaun's diplomatic approach had failed, surveillance operations were ongoing, and eventually the Vorta would escalate to more direct methods. What about Section 31's interest? Jensen looked directly at Sloan. You warned me about Dominion acquisition attempts. What's your operational stake in this situation? Sloan smiled thinly. Section 31 has two primary concerns. First, preventing Dominion acquisition of your augmentation technology. Second, determining whether your technology could provide the Federation with similar strategic advantages. Enhanced soldiers without genetic modification would circumvent the Federation's augmentation prohibitions while providing combat capabilities comparable to Jem'Hadar. You want to create Federation super soldiers using my augmentations as the template. We want to ensure the Federation survives, Sloan corrected. If that requires developing enhanced personnel capabilities that operate within legal frameworks, then yes. Your augmentations represent a potential solution to strategic problems that conventional approaches haven't resolved. Kira's expression darkened. Enhanced soldiers are exactly what the Federation was founded to prevent. Khan Noonien Singh nearly destroyed Earth with genetically modified troops. Creating cybernetically augmented soldiers would violate every principle the Federation claims to represent. The Federation's principles won't matter if the Dominion conquers the Alpha Quadrant, Sloan countered calmly. Moral purity is a luxury afforded by military security. When security fails, principles become academic exercises. Enough. Sisko's voice cut through the developing argument with command authority. We're not debating Federation policy. We're briefing Mr. Jensen on the strategic situation so he can make informed decisions about his own safety and cooperation. The holographic display shifted again, showing Deep Space Nine's position relative to Dominion-controlled territory and the Bajoran wormhole. This station is strategically critical, Sisko continued. Control of the wormhole means control of the fastest route between the Alpha and Gamma quadrants. If the Dominion captures Deep Space Nine, they can reinforce their invasion forces indefinitely. We hold the wormhole, we maintain strategic parity. We lose it, we lose the war. Which makes me a variable in station security, Jensen observed. If the Dominion attempts acquisition operations targeting me, it could compromise defensive integrity. Exactly, Odo confirmed. You're a potential vulnerability that Weyaun will exploit if given opportunity. My security protocols can manage standard infiltration attempts, but Dominion operations are rarely standard. Jensen stood, moving to the holographic display and studying the tactical data with professional assessment protocols. The Federation was fighting a defensive war against a numerically superior opponent with technological parity and strategic initiative. Standard military doctrine suggested three options: decisive engagement to break enemy momentum, strategic withdrawal to consolidate defenses, or asymmetric operations targeting enemy vulnerabilities. You're considering asymmetric operations, Jensen said, not asking but confirming. Target Dominion strategic assets, disrupt supply lines, eliminate key personnel. Standard guerrilla doctrine when conventional engagement favors the enemy. Sloan's expression registered something approaching approval. Section 31 has been conducting such operations since the war began. We've had mixed success. Jem'Hadar facilities are heavily defended, Vorta administrators are replaceable through cloning, and the founders themselves are nearly impossible to target directly. But you have been targeting them, Bashir interjected, his voice carrying undisguised contempt. The morphogenic virus, Section 31's biological weapon designed to exterminate the founders. Genocide disguised as strategic necessity. A weapon that could end the war, Sloan replied without apparent remorse. The founders control the Dominion absolutely. Eliminate them, and the entire command structure collapses. The Jem'Hadar lose their gods, the Vorta lose their purpose, and occupied territories could be liberated without further bloodshed. Jensen had heard similar justifications before. Eliminate the leadership, collapse the organization, achieve victory through decapitation strikes rather than prolonged conflict. Bob Page had made identical arguments about Pangaea, control the infrastructure, and you controlled everything dependent on it. What's the morphogenic virus's current status? Jensen asked. Silence stretched uncomfortably before Cisco responded. Deployed. The founders are infected, and the disease is progressing. Starfleet Command discovered Section 31's operation and condemned it, but the damage is done. The founders are dying, and the cure, if one exists, is classified at the highest levels. And the Dominion knows, Kira added. Which makes them desperate. Desperate enemies take desperate actions. Weyoun's interest in your augmentations might not be purely strategic, it could be survival-driven. If the founders die, the Vorta need alternative power structures. Enhanced Jem'Hadar could provide that structure if properly controlled. Jensen processed the revelation with tactical detachment while his organic mind struggled with the moral implications. Section 31 had deployed a biological weapon designed for genocide, the Federation had discovered and condemned it but couldn't reverse it, and the Dominion was facing existential threat that would drive increasingly aggressive actions. And he'd been dropped into the center of this situation carrying technology that multiple factions wanted to exploit for competing objectives. What do you want from me? Jensen asked, addressing the question to the room rather than any specific individual. Cooperation, Cisco said simply. Remain on the station under security protocols, report any contact with Dominion operatives, and submit to regular monitoring to ensure your augmentations remain under control. In exchange, we provide protection, resources, and continued investigation into methods for returning you to your proper timeline. Section 31 wants more than cooperation, Sloan added. We want access to your augmentation specifications. Full technical documentation, adaptive protocol analysis, and your consent to serve as test subject for compatibility studies. In exchange, we provide complete historical records from your era, Section 31's protection from Dominion acquisition attempts, and priority assistance with temporal displacement resolution. And if I refuse both offers? Jensen kept his voice neutral. Then you remain a variable that neither side can afford to ignore, Odo stated bluntly. The Dominion will continue acquisition attempts, Section 31 will maintain surveillance, and you'll exist in a permanent state of contested asset status. Not a pleasant existence, Mr. Jensen. Jensen returned to his seat, his augmented mind running rapid cost-benefit analysis across multiple operational scenarios. Cooperation with Starfleet meant security but limited autonomy. Cooperation with Section 31 meant resources but moral compromise. Refusing both meant independence but constant threat. He'd faced similar decisions in 2029, corporate employment that offered security but demanded compromise, freelance operations that provided autonomy but increased vulnerability, or complete withdrawal that meant survival but isolation. He'd chosen a fourth path then. Maybe he could find one now. I'll cooperate with station security protocols, Jensen said carefully. Regular monitoring, security check-ins, reporting Dominion contact. But I'm not providing augmentation specifications to Section 31 or submitting to experimental studies. My body, my technology, my choice. Sloan's expression didn't change. That's short-sighted, Mr. Jensen. Section 31 could provide. I don't care what Section 31 could provide, Jensen interrupted. I spent 2 years investigating organizations that justified atrocities through appeals to necessity. The Illuminati, Majestic 12, corporate shadow governments. All of them claimed they were protecting humanity while exploiting people they considered expendable. Section 31 uses different vocabulary, but the pattern is identical. So no, you don't get my cooperation, my technology, or my complicity in whatever operations you're conducting. The room's atmosphere shifted, tension escalating as Sloan's pleasant neutrality hardened into something colder. You're making assumptions based on incomplete information, Sloan said quietly. Section 31 operates according to principles you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Jensen countered. You're the Illuminati's descendants, refined through 3 centuries of operational experience. You've learned to wrap authoritarianism in humanitarian rhetoric, to disguise exploitation as protection, to convince yourselves that the ends justify methods you'd condemn in any enemy. But the core pattern remains unchanged. Secret organizations operating beyond accountability while claiming moral authority. Bashir's expression registered surprise followed by something approaching vindication. Kira's posture shifted almost imperceptibly toward support. O'Brien maintained professional neutrality, but his biosignature showed elevated stress markers suggesting internal conflict. Sisko's face was unreadable, but he spoke with measured authority. Mr. Sloan, I think this meeting has run its course. Mr. Jensen has made his position clear. Unless you have operational authority to contradict my command of this station, we're done here. Sloan stood slowly, his movements controlled and deliberate. Commander Sisko, you're making a mistake. Mr. Jensen represents strategic value that we cannot afford to leave unmanaged. If he won't cooperate voluntarily, then he won't cooperate at all, Sisko interrupted. Because this is my station, and I won't permit coercion of civilians under my protection. Even civilians carrying advanced technology during wartime. Is that clear? The confrontation hung in the air for several seconds before Sloan's expression returned to pleasant neutrality. Perfectly clear, Commander. Though I suspect circumstances will eventually demonstrate why voluntary cooperation serves everyone's interests better than principled resistance. He left without further comment, and the room's atmosphere shifted again, relief mixed with apprehension. You've just made an enemy of Section 31, Odo observed. That's rarely wise. I've made enemies before, Jensen replied. At least these ones operate in a universe where I understand the rules. Sisko dismissed the senior staff, but gestured for Jensen to remain. When they were alone, the commander's expression softened slightly. That was either very brave or very stupid, Mr. Jensen. I'm not certain which. Probably both. But I learned in 2029 that surrendering autonomy to organizations claiming protective authority usually ends with you becoming either their weapon or their victim. I'd rather face threats I can see than collaborate with threats disguised as allies. Section 31 doesn't forget refusals, Sisko warned. They'll continue monitoring you, analyzing you, waiting for circumstances that force your cooperation. And if the war situation deteriorates, they'll escalate their approach. Let them. I've spent 3 centuries, subjectively speaking, dealing with shadow organizations. One more won't kill me. Sisko's expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced, but he nodded. Dismissed, Mr. Jensen. And one more thing, Dr. Bashir respects what you did in there. So does Major Kira. You've earned allies by refusing to compromise principles, even when compromise would have been easier. That matters on this station. Jensen left Sisko's office, his augmented hearing catching fragments of conversation as senior staff dispersed to their respective duties. Stood up to Section 31. Either courageous or suicidal. Reminds me of the Maquis, actually. His quarters felt different when he returned, less like temporary refuge and more like defensive position. The briefing had clarified his strategic situation with uncomfortable precision. The Dominion wanted his technology, Section 31 wanted his cooperation, and he just refused both while sitting at the center of the war's most strategically critical location. His computer terminal showed a new message, text only, no origin identification. Principles are admirable, Mr. Jensen. But principles don't stop Jem'Hadar soldiers. When circumstances change your perspective, and they will, Section 31 will be waiting. Jensen deleted the message, but his augmented memory had already recorded it perfectly. Sloan's threat was clear, Section 31 would manufacture circumstances forcing Jensen's cooperation, and they'd wait patiently for the opportunity. He'd dealt with patient predators before. The question was whether this time, 3 centuries beyond everything he'd known, he could find a path that didn't end with him being used as a weapon in someone else's war. Outside his viewport, the Bajoran wormhole opened briefly, its brilliant energy cascade connecting 2 quadrants across 70,000 light-years. The prophets, Sisko had called the beings inside. Non-corporeal entities existing outside linear time. Jensen wondered if they'd brought him here deliberately, if his displacement had been random chance or orchestrated intervention. And if orchestrated, whether he was meant to be a variable in the war's equation or something else entirely. His augmented systems couldn't provide answers. Some questions existed beyond tactical analysis, beyond threat assessment, beyond everything his cybernetic enhancements could calculate. Sometimes you just had to act on incomplete information and hope your principles held when everything else failed. Jensen had learned that lesson in 2029. 3 centuries later, he'd have to learn it again. The crisis arrived 6 days later, precisely as Section 31 had predicted, though whether they'd predicted it or orchestrated it remained an open question. Jensen was in the station's gym facility, running combat drills to maintain augmented muscle memory, when the alarm klaxons erupted across Deep Space Nine. His augmented hearing identified the pattern immediately. Not a drill, not a minor incident, but a full station-wide alert indicating immediate threat. He was moving before the announcement finished, his Icarus landing system allowing him to drop from the gym's upper level directly to the promenade deck 3 stories below. His smart vision activated automatically, scanning for threats through the sudden chaos of civilians rushing toward emergency shelters. All personnel to emergency stations. Dominion Strike Force approaching station. ETA 7 minutes. Defensive protocols engaged. Repeat, Dominion Strike Force inbound. Jensen's tactical assessment protocols cataloged the situation with mechanical precision. 7 minutes until engagement meant the enemy was already within weapons range of the station. Deep Space Nine's defensive capabilities were formidable, but Dominion tactics favored overwhelming force against strategic targets. This wasn't a raid. This was an acquisition attempt. His communicator chirped. Odo's voice cutting through the chaos. Jensen, report to operations immediately. This is not a request. Jensen sprinted through corridors that had become familiar over the past 2 weeks, his augmented reflexes allowing him to navigate the crowd without collision. 3 minutes to reach operations, fast for baseline humans, easily achievable with his enhanced musculature and processing speed. The operations center was controlled chaos when he arrived. Sisko stood at the central tactical display, Major Kira coordinating defensive positions, O'Brien managing power distribution to weapons systems and shields. The view screen showed what his augmented vision confirmed through the viewport, 3 Jem'Hadar attack ships approaching in assault formation, their weapons charging. Mr. Jensen, Sisko acknowledged without looking away from the tactical display. The Dominion Strike Force transmitted a message 17 minutes ago. They're demanding your immediate transfer to their custody. They claim you're carrying stolen Dominion biotechnology and are wanted for questioning regarding technological theft. That's fiction, Jensen stated flatly. I've never been in Dominion territory, never accessed their technology, and they know it. Of course they know it, Odo replied from his security station. But diplomatic fiction provides operational cover. If we refuse their demand, they claim justification for military action. If we comply, they acquire you legally through manufactured charges. Kira's jaw tightened as she studied the tactical display. 3 attack ships. That's significant force commitment for a single extraction operation. They're serious about acquiring you, and they're willing to damage the station to do it. Shields are holding, O'Brien reported. But if they concentrate fire on any single section, they'll penetrate within 4 to 5 minutes. We're outnumbered and they have tactical initiative. The tactical situation was straightforward, Deep Space Nine could survive the engagement, but casualties would be significant and infrastructure damage would compromise defensive capabilities for weeks. The Dominion was betting that Cisco would consider one person's freedom less valuable than station integrity. Standard hostage negotiation tactics scaled to military operations. Jensen's augmented mind ran rapid scenario analysis while his organic consciousness dealt with the moral implications. People would die if he stayed. The station's defensive capacity would be compromised, leaving it vulnerable to subsequent attacks. And the Dominion would simply return with larger forces if this attempt failed. Unless he removed himself as the acquisition target. "Commander," Jensen said quietly, "I can resolve this." Cisco turned to face him directly. "You're not surrendering yourself to the Dominion. That's not an option." "I'm not suggesting surrender. I'm suggesting I leave the station before they have justification to attack. Take a runabout, exit through the docking bay, and put enough distance between me and Deep Space Nine that I'm no longer your strategic liability." "And then what?" Kira demanded. "The Dominion ships pursue you, destroy your runabout, and recover your body, and your augmentations, from the wreckage? That's not escape, that's suicide with extra steps." "Not if I reach the Badlands first," Jensen countered, his augmented memory accessing navigation data he'd studied during his 2 weeks on the station. Plasma storms, sensor interference, navigation hazards, the Dominion would have tactical disadvantage in that environment. I could lose pursuit, find somewhere to hide, and remove myself from the strategic equation entirely. O'Brien looked up from his engineering console. "The Badlands are 78 million kilometers from Deep Space Nine. That's 19 minutes at maximum warp in a runabout. The Jem'Hadar attack ships are faster, they'd overtake you before you reach the storms." "Then I need a faster ship," Jensen said. "Or I need to slow them down." Cisco studied Jensen with the calculating assessment of a chess player evaluating sacrificial moves. "You're proposing we help you escape, which violates our protection protocols and potentially undermines diplomatic relations with the Dominion, assuming diplomatic relations survive this incident at all." "I'm proposing I stop being your problem," Jensen replied. "The Dominion wants my augmentation technology. Section 31 wants my cooperation. I'm refusing to give either of them what they want, which makes me a contested asset that endangers everyone around me. Remove me from the equation, and this station stops being a battleground for my autonomy." The tactical display flashed, Dominion ships were 3 minutes from weapons range. Whatever decision was made needed to happen immediately. "There's another option," Bashir interjected from the medical station. "The runabout USS Rio Grande has enhanced medical facilities and upgraded warp engines from recent modifications. It's faster than standard runabouts and could potentially reach the Badlands ahead of Dominion pursuit if we provide covering fire during the initial escape window." Kira's expression hardened. "You're suggesting we actively assist his escape while engaging Dominion forces. That's an act of war, not defensive operations." "The Dominion attacking this station is already an act of war," Bashir countered. "We're simply choosing which conflict serves Federation interests better, defending an asset they want to acquire, or denying them that acquisition through alternative means." Odo moved from his security station, his expression more troubled than Jensen had seen. "If we help you escape, Mr. Jensen, Section 31 will classify it as treasonous collaboration. They'll claim you're fleeing with classified intelligence about Federation defensive capabilities and your augmentation technology. You'll become a fugitive from both the Dominion and Federation authorities." "I've been a fugitive before," Jensen said quietly. "In 2029, I spent months operating outside corporate and governmental authority while investigating conspiracies everyone denied existed. I survived by staying mobile, maintaining situational awareness, and trusting no one. I can do it again." Cisco stood silent for 15 seconds, an eternity during tactical crisis, before speaking with command finality. "Chief, prepare the Rio Grande for immediate departure. Medical supplies, emergency rations, full fuel reserves. Major Kira, coordinate defensive positions to provide covering fire during Mr. Jensen's departure." We'll create an engagement window that forces the Dominion ships to choose between pursuing him and pressing their attack on the station. Commander. Odo began. I'm making a tactical decision, Constable. The Dominion wants Mr. Jensen. They're willing to attack a Federation starbase to acquire him. Keeping him here transforms this station into a permanent target. Facilitating his departure removes their operational objective and de-escalates the immediate threat. Sisko's expression was grim. I don't like it either, but command decisions rarely feel good. Jensen moved toward the turbolift, but Bashir intercepted him with a medical kit. Take this. Emergency medical supplies, tricorder, thermal regenerator. If your augmentations malfunction in the Badlands plasma interference, you'll need conventional medical support. Doctor. You stood up to Section 31 on principle, Mr. Jensen. The least I can do is ensure you survive long enough for that principle to matter. Bashir's expression was troubled but resolute. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Sometimes the only way to protect people is to remove yourself from the situation that endangers them. Kira appeared beside him, pressing a hand phaser into his augmented palm. It's set to maximum charge. Jem'Hadar have enhanced durability, stun settings won't stop them. If they board your runabout, shoot to kill and don't hesitate. I appreciate. Don't thank me. I'm not doing this because I like you, I'm doing it because the Dominion took too much from my world already. They don't get to take anything more from this station. Her expression was fierce. Survive, Jensen. And if you find a way back to your timeline, tell them that in the future, we're still fighting the same wars against the same tyrannies. Maybe knowing that will help them make better choices. O'Brien's voice crackled through the communicator. Rio Grande is ready. Docking Bay 3. You've got 90 seconds before Dominion weapons range. Jensen sprinted toward the docking bay, his augmented musculature pushing beyond baseline human limitations. Station personnel flattened against walls as he passed, and his augmented hearing caught fragments of their confused conversations. That's the augmented guy. Dominion's attacking because of him. Should have just handed him over. Maybe they were right. Maybe surrendering himself would have been the moral choice, sacrificing his freedom for station security. But Jensen had learned through brutal experience that surrendering to organizations that demanded compliance never ended with just one sacrifice, it established precedent for unlimited future demands. Better to run and maintain autonomy than comply and lose everything. The Rio Grande sat ready in Docking Bay 3, its compact frame belying the sophisticated systems O'Brien had installed. Jensen's augmented vision identified the upgraded warp nacelles, enhanced sensor arrays, and reinforced structural integrity fields. He entered the runabout, sliding into the pilot's seat and initiating launch protocols with practiced efficiency. The controls were unfamiliar, 3 centuries of interface evolution, but the fundamental principles remained consistent. Propulsion, navigation, defensive systems, communications. Rio Grande to operations. Ready for departure. Sisko's voice responded immediately. Cleared for launch, Mr. Jensen. We'll engage Dominion forces the moment you clear the docking bay. Head directly for the Badlands at maximum warp. Don't look back, don't attempt communication, and don't stop until you've reached the plasma storms. Understood, Commander. And Sisko, thank you. For treating me like a person instead of an asset. Good luck, Mr. Jensen. You're going to need it. The docking bay doors opened to vacuum, and Jensen launched the Rio Grande with full impulse thrust. The runabout responded beautifully, O'Brien's modifications providing acceleration that exceeded standard specifications. Behind him, Deep Space Nine's weapons arrays opened fire, phaser banks and photon torpedoes creating a defensive barrage that forced the Dominion attack ships to adjust formation. The tactical maneuver created exactly the window Jensen needed, and he engaged warp drive with the station still visible in his aft sensors. The Jem'Hadar ships responded immediately. Two broke formation to pursue while the third continued toward Deep Space Nine. Apparently the Dominion had decided that acquiring Jensen was worth dividing their forces. His sensors showed their pursuit vectors, and his augmented mind calculated intercept trajectories with mechanical precision. 14 minutes until they overtook him. 19 minutes until he reached the Badlands. 5 minutes too slow. Jensen pushed the Rio Grande's engines beyond recommended parameters, the warp core temperature climbing toward critical thresholds. O'Brien's modifications held, but the structural integrity fields were straining under the stress. The Dominion ships closed the gap, 3 minutes, then 2, then weapons range. The first polaron beam struck the Rio Grande's aft shields, and the runabout shuddered violently. Warning indicators flashed across the console, shields at 67%, structural integrity compromised, warp drive destabilizing. Jensen's tactical assessment protocols identified the obvious conclusion. He wouldn't reach the Badlands before the Dominion ships destroyed him. Unless he changed the equation. His augmented hands moved across the console, rerouting power from life support to shields and weapons. The cabin's atmosphere would remain stable for 18 minutes, longer than he'd survive if the shields failed. Another polaron beam struck, and shields dropped to 41%. Jensen activated the runabout's weapons systems, phaser arrays and a single photon torpedo. Minimal armament compared to Jem'Hadar attack ships, but sometimes minimal was enough. He fired the photon torpedo not at the pursuing ships but at the space directly ahead of them, timing the detonation to create a plasma wake that would force them to adjust course or risk collision. The Dominion ships separated, losing precious seconds to evasive maneuvers. 8 minutes to the Badlands. Jensen's augmented vision detected the plasma storms on extreme sensor range. Massive electromagnetic disturbances that would make navigation nearly impossible and pursuit even more difficult. If he could reach them, he'd have tactical advantage through environmental familiarity and augmented sensory capabilities. Another polaron beam struck, shields at 19%. The Dominion ships were compensating for his tactical maneuvers, their pursuit vectors tightening. They'd overtake him in 90 seconds, well before he reached the storms. Jensen's fingers moved across the console one final time, implementing a maneuver he'd learned during Seraph Industries' security operations, the desperate gambit. He cut main power entirely. The Rio Grande dropped out of warp with violent abruptness, momentum carrying it forward at sublight velocity while electromagnetic emissions dropped to near zero. To the Dominion sensors, the runabout would appear to have suffered catastrophic systems failure. The Jem'Hadar ships overshot his position by 200 kilometers before realizing their target had stopped. Jensen waited 3 seconds, long enough for the enemy ships to begin deceleration and course correction, before reigniting the warp drive and accelerating perpendicular to his original trajectory. The maneuver bought him 90 additional seconds. 5 minutes to the Badlands. The Dominion ships adjusted pursuit, their commanders apparently recognizing the desperation maneuver for what it was, tactical brilliance or suicidal recklessness, depending on the outcome. Another weapons strike, shields failed completely, and the polaron beam tore through the Rio Grande's aft section. Atmosphere vented, emergency bulkhead sealed, and propulsion destabilized. Jensen's augmented systems detected the plasma storms approaching with precise sensor clarity. Electromagnetic chaos that would make conventional navigation impossible but that his smart vision could potentially parse through integrated data analysis. 3 minutes. The Rio Grande was dying around him, systems failing in cascading sequences, structural integrity approaching catastrophic breach. But 3 minutes was achievable if he could maintain minimal propulsion and prevent the Dominion ships from landing another direct hit. He rerouted everything. Shields, weapons, life support, inertial dampeners, directly to propulsion. The warp core screamed in protest, temperature indicators climbing into critical ranges, but the engines held. 2 minutes. A polaron beam grazed the Rio Grande's port nacelle, and the runabout tumbled violently. Jensen's augmented musculature absorbed impact forces that would have killed a baseline human, his Titan shield engaging automatically to protect against internal debris impacts. 1 minute. The plasma storms loomed before him, massive electromagnetic cascades that his sensors could barely penetrate. Entering them at warp speed was tantamount to suicide, but remaining outside them guaranteed destruction. Jensen cut the warp drive and dove into the plasma storms at full impulse, the Rio Grande's failing shields barely protecting against the initial energy cascade. Behind him, the Dominion ships hesitated at the storm's edge, their sensors showing nothing but electromagnetic chaos, their tactical doctrine prioritizing asset preservation over reckless pursuit. They'd wait at the perimeter, monitoring for any emergence, reporting Jensen's position to Dominion Command for subsequent recovery operations. Inside the plasma storms, Jensen fought to maintain control as the Rio Grande disintegrated around him. Systems failed completely, propulsion offline, sensors blind, life support terminated. His augmented vision provided the only navigation data, parsing electromagnetic patterns that would have been invisible to baseline human perception. The runabout finally died 70 kilometers into the storms, its warp core going critical in a controlled shutdown that prevented catastrophic explosion but left Jensen adrift in a metallic coffin surrounded by lethal plasma radiation. His Titan shield engaged automatically, the electromagnetic barrier providing temporary protection against the external radiation. But temporary meant 7 seconds of coverage before biocell depletion. Jensen activated his smart vision to maximum range, scanning the plasma chaos for anything resembling shelter, a debris field, a dead vessel, an asteroid with sufficient mass to provide radiation shielding. 5 seconds remaining. His augmented vision detected something 200 meters distant, a structure that registered on sensors as artificial construction, massive enough to generate its own gravitational field, somehow maintaining structural integrity despite the plasma storm's destructive environment. 3 seconds. Jensen opened the Rio Grande's emergency hatch, his Icarus landing system engaging as he propelled himself into vacuum. Plasma radiation washed over him immediately, his Titan shield collapsing under sustained exposure, his augmented biology absorbing punishment that would have killed him instantly in 2029. He crossed the 200 meters in 23 seconds, his augmented strength allowing him to maneuver through electromagnetic chaos using debris as improvised propulsion points. The structure grew clearer as he approached. Ancient architecture, designs that predated anything in Federation databases, energy signatures that suggested active systems despite apparent abandonment. An airlock materialized from the superstructure, opening as if responding to his presence. Jensen didn't question the improbability, survival rarely permitted philosophical examination of fortune. He tumbled through the airlock as it cycled, atmosphere flooding the chamber with breathable composition, gravity engaging to pull him to the deck with bone-jarring impact his augmented skeleton absorbed without fracture. The inner door opened to reveal a corridor illuminated by ambient light sources that activated at his approach, organic architecture, curved surfaces, materials that seemed to shift subtly as if responding to observation. Jensen's tactical assessment protocols struggled to categorize what he was seeing. Not Federation technology. Not Dominion. Not anything his databases could identify. He moved deeper into the structure, his augmented hearing detecting sounds that might have been environmental systems or might have been something else entirely, rhythmic patterns that suggested intentional design rather than random mechanism. A chamber opened before him, vast space with holographic displays floating in mid-air, showing star charts that his augmented vision recognized as the Badron sector. But the charts showed temporal variations, probability branches, causal nexus points. Information that suggested observation not just of space but of time itself. "Welcome, Adam Jensen," a voice said, not through speakers but seemingly from the air itself, resonating at frequencies his augmented hearing could detect across multiple spectral ranges. "We have been expecting you." Jensen's threat assessment protocols escalated to maximum, but his augmented vision detected no hostile intent, no weapon signatures, no immediate danger. "Who are you?" he asked the empty chamber. "We are the prophets. We exist outside your linear time. We brought you here because you are necessary." The word settled over Jensen with the weight of revelation he'd been avoiding since his displacement. Not random temporal accident. Not technological malfunction. Deliberate intervention by beings that existed beyond conventional causality. Necessary for what? Jensen demanded. The holographic displays shifted, showing scenes of possible futures. Deep Space Nine destroyed, the Dominion victorious, the Federation dissolved. Alternative branches where different outcomes played out based on incomprehensible variables. The war destroys many futures, the prophet's voice continued. The Dominion's victory is probable. The Federation's survival requires variables that alter probability streams. You are such a variable, displaced from your linear time, carrying knowledge and capability that change outcomes. Jensen's augmented mind struggled to process information that violated every principle of causality he understood. You brought me here, displaced me 3 centuries, to change the outcome of a war I have no stake in. You have stake, the prophet corrected. The Dominion's victory ensures futures where augmentation technology becomes tool of oppression rather than liberation. Where your principles, autonomy, choice, human dignity, are erased by genetic tyranny. We brought you here because you understand these stakes better than those who were born in this time. The holographic displays shifted again, showing Jensen's timeline, Detroit burning, Seraph Industries destroyed, World War III consuming civilization. Then alternative branches, futures where augmentation conflicts resolved differently, where humanity found balanced integration between organic and synthetic, where the principles Jensen had fought for actually mattered. These futures require your participation, the prophet stated. Not as weapon. Not as asset. But as catalyst, the variable that demonstrates augmentation without corruption, enhancement without tyranny, choice without compulsion. Jensen stared at the holographic futures, his augmented vision processing information while his human consciousness struggled with the implications. He'd been brought here deliberately, displaced by beings that existed outside time, positioned at the center of a war that would determine not just his timeline's future but fundamental principles about what humanity could become. And if I refuse? Jensen asked quietly. If I reject being your catalyst and just try to survive? Then probability collapses toward Dominion victory. And the futures where augmentation liberates rather than enslaves disappear from causal possibility. The prophet's voice carried no judgment, only statement of consequence. We cannot compel your choice, Adam Jensen. We can only show you why your choice matters and allow you to decide whether principles you fought for in your time deserve fighting for in ours. The holographic displays faded, and Jensen stood alone in the ancient chamber, surrounded by technology that predated Federation civilization, carrying augmentations that represented both his trauma and his strength, facing a choice that somehow mattered more than survival. He'd never asked for this. Not the augmentations, not the displacement, not the responsibility of being a variable in cosmic probability calculations. But asking didn't matter. Reality dealt its hands regardless of consent, and sometimes the only meaningful choice was whether you played with integrity or folded entirely. Jensen had spent 2 years in 2029 fighting conspiracies that tried to erase human autonomy in the name of progress. 3 centuries later, different enemies, same fundamental war. He activated his communicator, knowing it wouldn't reach Deep Space Nine through the plasma storms and prophet technology, but needing to speak the decision aloud anyway. This is Adam Jensen. I'm alive, I'm secure, and I'm not running anymore. If you're listening, Cisco, tell Section 31 and the Dominion that they can both go to hell. I'm not their weapon, their asset, or their variable. But I'm also not hiding while tyranny claims moral authority over human augmentation. He looked up at the chamber's organic architecture, addressing beings that existed beyond his perception. You want a catalyst? Fine. But we do this on my terms. No manipulation, no hidden agendas, no sacrificing individuals for collective outcomes. If I'm fighting your war, it's because the principles matter, not because you've engineered circumstances that leave me no alternative. The prophet's response resonated through the chamber with something that might have been approval. Then we begin. And in the plasma storms of the Badlands, hidden in ancient technology and protected by beings existing outside linear time, Adam Jensen prepared to stop running and start fighting. Not as anyone's weapon, but as himself, augmented, displaced, and absolutely unwilling to surrender autonomy to anyone's definition of necessity. Some principles were worth 3 centuries of displacement. He'd prove it or die trying. The prophet station, Jensen had no other name for it, existed in a state of controlled impossibility. His augmented vision detected spatial geometries that violated Euclidean principles, energy flows that defied thermodynamic conservation, and temporal markers suggesting the structure existed simultaneously across multiple time periods. The prophets had built something that wasn't simply advanced technology but a fundamental rewriting of physical law. For 3 days, Jensen explored the station's accessible areas while his augmented systems adapted to the environment's unique properties. His biocells charged from ambient energy fields that seemed to recognize his cybernetic biology as compatible rather than foreign. His smart vision gradually learned to parse the station's nonlinear architecture, identifying patterns in the apparent chaos that suggested intentional design. The prophets themselves remained largely absent. Occasional voices that offered guidance without explanation, holographic displays that showed probable futures without dictating choices, and a persistent sense of observation without the oppressive weight of surveillance. It was almost peaceful, which made Jensen deeply suspicious. On the 4th day, the prophets manifested with greater specificity. The holographic displays activated throughout the station's central chamber, showing Deep Space Nine under siege. Not by 3 Jem'Hadar attack ships, but by an entire Dominion fleet. 40 vessels, multiple warship classes, and what Jensen's tactical assessment identified as a planetary assault configuration. The Dominion escalates, the prophet's voice resonated. Your departure from Deep Space Nine was interpreted as Federation complicity in harboring stolen technology. The founders authorize full military response, capture the station, secure the wormhole, acquire you through territorial occupation. Jensen studied the tactical display with professional detachment. 40 ships against Deep Space Nine's defensive capabilities meant the station would fall within hours unless reinforced. Civilian casualties would be catastrophic, and strategic loss of the wormhole would shift the war's entire balance. When does this attack occur? 7 of your linear days from present moment. The Dominion assembles forces in Cardassian space, preparing coordinated assault that Federation intelligence has not yet detected. 7 days. Enough time to warn Cisco, but his communicator couldn't penetrate the plasma storms and prophet technology to reach the station. Enough time to return personally, but that would simply restore the acquisition objective that justified the assault. You're showing me this because you want me to prevent it, Jensen concluded. But returning to Deep Space Nine defeats the purpose of my departure. The moment I appear, the Dominion has justification for the attack. The holographic displays shifted, showing alternative probability branches. In some, Jensen returned and was immediately captured, his augmentation technology reverse-engineered by Dominion scientists. In others, he remained hidden and watched the station fall, its destruction eliminating strategic assets while accomplishing nothing. But one branch showed different outcomes. Futures where the attack was prevented not through his capture or sacrifice, but through actions that addressed the Dominion's fundamental concerns. The Dominion fears you, the prophet explained. Not because of what you are, but because of what you represent, augmentation that succeeds where their genetic engineering fails. They pursue you because acquisition seems safer than allowing your technology to strengthen Federation capabilities. Remove this fear, and the strategic calculus changes. Remove the fear how? By proving my augmentations aren't as advanced as they believe. By demonstrating their limitations. Jensen's tactical mind identified the obvious problem. Any intelligence I provide could be dismissed as deception. The Dominion won't trust my word. Then provide demonstration that requires no trust. Show them directly what your augmentations can and cannot accomplish. Allow their assessment under controlled conditions that satisfy intelligence requirements without surrendering operational security. The proposal was elegant in its complexity, voluntary intelligence sharing that removed mystery without compromising capability. The Dominion wanted to know if Jensen's augmentations represented strategic threat or manageable variable. Providing that information eliminated their primary motivation for the Deep Space Nine assault. But it also meant deliberate exposure to Dominion analysis, accepting vulnerability in exchange for de-escalation. Jensen had made similar calculations in 2029, revealing capability to one faction to prevent worse outcomes with another. Sometimes the least bad option was still bad, just survivable. And Section 31? Jensen asked. They'll interpret voluntary intelligence sharing with the Dominion as treason. They've already classified me as potential asset or threat, this would confirm threat status. Section 31's classification is irrelevant to probability streams. Their opposition does not prevent necessary outcomes, only complicates achievement pathways. The prophet's tone carried what might have been dismissiveness if beings existing outside linear time could feel contempt. Your concern is autonomy preservation. Section 31 threatens this autonomy regardless of your choices. The variable is whether you address threats proactively or reactively. Jensen appreciated the tactical clarity even while resenting the manipulation. The prophets were presenting choices, but the options were carefully curated to achieve outcomes they'd already identified as preferable. It wasn't compulsion, but it wasn't genuine freedom either. Still, manufactured choices were better than no choices, and preventing Deep Space Nine's destruction mattered independent of profit objectives. How do I contact the Dominion without the communication being intercepted by Federation or Section 31 monitoring? The holographic displays shifted, showing a communication relay system integrated into the Prophet Station's architecture. We provide secure channel, quantum encrypted transmission that reaches Dominion command directly. Message content is your determination. We facilitate communication, not dictate its substance. Jensen moved to the relay system, his augmented fingers navigating the unfamiliar interface with adaptive efficiency. The prophets had designed it for compatibility with his cybernetic neural interface, another example of their disturbing level of knowledge about his specific augmentation configuration. He composed the message carefully, aware that every word would be analyzed by Dominion intelligence and potentially multiple other factions monitoring secured communications. To Dominion Command. This is Adam Jensen. I understand your forces are preparing military action against Deep Space Nine justified by my presence as acquisition objective. I propose alternative resolution that addresses your intelligence requirements without military engagement. I will submit to comprehensive augmentation assessment under the following conditions. 1. Assessment occurs at neutral location, neither Federation nor Dominion territory. 2. Assessment is conducted by Dominion scientific personnel with Federation observers present ensuring procedural integrity. 3. Assessment is limited to non-invasive analysis, biosignature scanning, capability demonstration, technological principle documentation. No physical extraction of augmentation components, no genetic sampling, no interrogation regarding Federation security protocols. 4. Assessment results are shared with both Dominion and Federation simultaneously, preventing intelligence asymmetry. 5. Upon assessment completion, both factions agree to cease acquisition attempts and classify me as neutral non-combatant with right to autonomous movement. This proposal provides intelligence you seek while preventing casualties and strategic complications from Deep Space Nine assault. Your response determines whether I remain engaged variable or disappeared asset. Respond through this communication channel within 48 hours or proposal expires. Adam Jensen. He transmitted the message before second-guessing the tactical decision, then watched the holographic displays show the communications path through quantum-encrypted relay networks that bypassed every monitoring system Federation or Dominion intelligence maintained. 26 hours until Dominion response, the prophet stated with certainty that came from existing outside linear causality. You should prepare for assessment protocols. Your augmentations require optimization for demonstration purposes. Controlled environment allows calibration that normal operation does not permit. Jensen's threat assessment protocols flagged the suggestion immediately. Optimization meaning what? Modifications to my augmentation systems. Refinement of existing capabilities. Your adaptive protocols have been constrained by biocell efficiency limitations and neural interface bandwidth restrictions. We can remove these constraints temporarily, allowing your augmentations to demonstrate their complete design capacity rather than their compromised operational status. The offer was simultaneously tempting and terrifying. Jensen's augmentations had always operated below their theoretical maximum. Dr. Reed had built safety margins into every system, preventing overload or catastrophic failure. Removing those margins would let him demonstrate capabilities he'd only theorized about. It would also risk permanent damage to systems that couldn't be repaired or replaced 3 centuries beyond their design era. What's the risk assessment? Jensen asked. 17% probability of temporary system instability. 3% probability of permanent capability reduction. 0% probability of catastrophic failure resulting in death or total augmentation loss. The prophet's voice carried statistical certainty that suggested they'd already observed every probability branch. Risk is acceptable relative to outcome necessity. That's your assessment. What's mine? Your assessment incorporates emotional variables we do not fully process: fear of modification without consent, trauma from original augmentation experience, distrust of entities claiming protective motivation. These variables increase perceived risk beyond objective probability calculation. Jensen almost laughed at the clinical accuracy. The prophets understood human psychology intellectually without experiencing it emotionally. They could calculate his responses without comprehending why they mattered. If I accept optimization, do I maintain conscious awareness throughout the process? Full sensory feedback, ability to terminate if complications develop. Complete consciousness maintained. Process is calibration of existing systems, not installation of new components. Your neural interface retains override authority throughout optimization sequence. That was the critical factor, maintaining control even during modification. Jensen had learned from bitter experience that surrendering consciousness during augmentation procedures meant surrendering autonomy over what was done to your body. All right, Jensen decided. But we establish abort parameters first. Any indication of permanent damage, any sign of neural interface compromise, any system behavior I don't explicitly authorize, process terminates immediately regardless of completion status. Acceptable parameters. The optimization chamber was located in the station's lower sections, a space that reminded Jensen uncomfortably of Serif Industries' augmentation cradles. But where those had been sterile medical equipment, this was something else entirely. Organic technology that seemed to breathe, adaptive systems that responded to his presence by configuring themselves to his specific cybernetic architecture. Jensen settled into the chamber, his augmented vision tracking every change in the environment as the optimization sequence began. Energy flowed into his biocell systems, not the gradual passive recharge he'd experienced, but active power transfer that filled his reserves to 117% capacity. His internal warnings screamed about overcharge danger, but the prophet systems regulated the flow with precision that prevented catastrophic overload. His neural interface bandwidth expanded, literally, as if someone had upgraded the data transmission pathways connecting his organic brain to cybernetic systems. Information that had flowed at megabyte rates suddenly moved at gigabyte capacity, his processing speed increasing proportionally. His Titan shield's duration extended from 7 seconds to 14 as power distribution optimization allowed more efficient energy usage. His smart vision's range doubled, resolution increased, and new filtering options appeared in his heads-up display: quantum uncertainty visualization, probability field detection, temporal distortion sensing. Capabilities Dr. Reed had theorized but never implemented because the neural interface couldn't handle the processing load. Now it could. The optimization continued for 97 minutes, and when it completed, Jensen felt fundamentally different. Not diminished or violated like his original augmentation, but enhanced. His systems responded with precision that bordered on telepathic. His sensory input was so refined he could detect individual heartbeats 3 rooms away, and his tactical assessment protocols processed information so rapidly that time seemed to slow whenever he engaged combat analysis mode. This was what Dr. Reed had envisioned. Augmentation as seamless extension of human capacity, technology, and biology merged so completely that the distinction became meaningless. It was extraordinary. It was terrifying. And it would last approximately 72 hours before his systems reverted to their previous operational parameters as safety margins reasserted themselves. Optimization complete, the prophet confirmed. You now demonstrate augmentation capability at designed maximum rather than safety-constrained operation. The Dominion's assessment will show your potential accurately rather than your typical limitation. Jensen stood, testing his newly optimized systems with experimental movements. His augmented strength felt effortless, his reflexes were instantaneous, and his sensory awareness painted a complete tactical picture of his environment with almost overwhelming detail. And after 72 hours, reversion to previous operational status. Permanent optimization would require modifications to your original augmentation architecture that exceed prophet authority. We facilitate temporary enhancement, not permanent alteration. Your autonomy regarding body modification remains absolute. 24 hours later, the Dominion response arrived. Adam Jensen. Your proposal is unexpected. The founders have authorized preliminary acceptance pending verification of good faith and operational security protocols. Assessment will occur at coordinates we provide, abandoned Cardassian outpost in neutral territory, equidistant from Federation and Dominion strategic positions. Federation observers are acceptable with condition they possess no authority to terminate assessment prematurely. Dominion scientific personnel will conduct complete analysis as specified in your parameters. Assessment duration, approximately 6 hours. Your conditions regarding non-invasive analysis and simultaneous intelligence sharing are acceptable. Condition 5, cessation of acquisition attempts, requires founder approval contingent on assessment results. If your augmentation technology proves strategically insignificant, agreement is granted. If assessment reveals capabilities exceeding current intelligence estimates, renegotiation may be required. Transport will be provided from your current location. Respond within 12 hours confirming acceptance. Weyoun, diplomatic representative of the Dominion. Jensen read the message 3 times, his optimized neural interface parsing linguistic patterns with enhanced analytical capability. Weyoun's phrasing suggested the Dominion was genuinely surprised by the voluntary assessment offer. Their strategic planning apparently hadn't included probability branches where Jensen chose cooperation over flight. But the conditional language regarding cessation of acquisition attempts was concerning. Renegotiation may be required, was diplomatic vocabulary for, we reserve the right to resume hostile acquisition if we determine you're sufficiently valuable. Standard negotiation tactics. Accept the framework while preserving operational flexibility to abandon it if circumstances changed. Jensen had used identical approaches in corporate security negotiations. He composed his response. Weyoun. I accept assessment parameters with clarification on condition 5. Renegotiation may be required, is unacceptable, either assessment results in permanent cessation of acquisition attempts or proposal is withdrawn. I will not participate in intelligence gathering that provides you data while preserving your operational freedom to exploit that data through resumed hostility. Revised Condition 5. Upon assessment completion, both Dominion and Federation classify me as protected non-combatant with absolute autonomy. No acquisition attempts, no recruitment operations, no surveillance beyond standard security protocols applicable to all neutral civilians. Violation of this agreement by either faction terminates my cooperation and justifies defensive actions I deem appropriate. Respond within 6 hours confirming acceptance of revised terms or negotiation ends. Jensen. The response arrived in 4 hours and 17 minutes. Jensen. The founders accept revised Condition 5 with Federation concurrence. Commander Sisko has been briefed through diplomatic channels and agrees to terms. Assessment will proceed at specified coordinates in 36 hours. Transport vessel is en route to your location. We look forward to finally understanding what makes you worth this extraordinary effort. Weian. Jensen smiled at the Vorta's final comment. Professional curiosity disguised as diplomatic courtesy. Weian genuinely wanted to know whether Jensen represented strategic asset or overestimated variable, and the assessment would finally provide answers. The question was whether those answers would satisfy the Dominion enough to honor their agreement or provoke them to find creative interpretations of cessation of acquisition attempts. Jensen would find out in 36 hours. The Prophet Station released him with minimal ceremony. A transport vessel appeared at the edge of the plasma storms exactly when promised, its transponder identifying it as Dominion but its configuration suggesting neutral diplomatic transport rather than military vessel. Jensen boarded carrying nothing except the medical kit Bashir had provided, the hand phaser from Kira, and augmentations operating at peak design capacity. He was as ready as 3 centuries of technological evolution and profit optimization could make him. The transport's interior was sterile, functional, and monitored by sensors sophisticated enough to analyze his biosignature continuously. Weian appeared via holographic communication 30 minutes into the journey, his expression pleasantly curious. Mr. Jensen. I'm gratified you chose cooperation. Many in your situation would have continued fleeing. Fleeing accomplishes nothing except delaying inevitable confrontation. I prefer addressing problems directly when strategic alternatives exist. A pragmatic philosophy. The founders will appreciate that. Weian's holographic form gestured at something off-screen. I should inform you that Section 31 attempted to intercept this transport. 3 times. We've provided them evidence that you're participating voluntarily and that Federation Command has sanctioned the assessment. They remain dissatisfied. Section 31's satisfaction isn't my concern. No, I imagine it isn't. Though I suspect their dissatisfaction will become increasingly problematic for you once this assessment concludes. They don't appreciate variables that operate outside their control frameworks. Jensen recognized the attempt at rapport building, Weian positioning himself as fellow professional dealing with unreasonable authorities. Classic intelligence operative technique designed to establish psychological alliance before exploitation. I've dealt with organizations like Section 31 before, Jensen replied. They're predictable in their unpredictability. They'll manufacture crises that justify intervention while claiming protective motivation. Eventually they overreach and expose themselves. I can wait. Weian's expression registered something that might have been respect. You're remarkably composed for someone about to voluntarily submit to Dominion scientific analysis. Most Federation personnel would be considerably more anxious. Most Federation personnel didn't spend 2 years investigating conspiracies where everyone was either manipulating you or being manipulated. You develop tolerance for uncomfortable situations when uncomfortable becomes normal. The transport arrived at the abandoned Cardassian outpost precisely on schedule, a military installation that had been stripped of strategic value during Cardassian withdrawal from Bajoran occupation but retained functional infrastructure for temporary operations. The assessment chamber had been prepared with remarkable thoroughness, Dominion scanning equipment, Federation monitoring stations, biometric analysis systems from both factions positioned to provide overlapping coverage. Commander Sisko stood with Major Kira and Dr. Bashir, their expressions carefully neutral. Weian waited with 3 Vorta scientists whose equipment cases suggested extremely sophisticated analytical capabilities. Mr. Jensen, Sisko acknowledged. Thank you for this. The Dominion fleet that was assembling for Deep Space Nine assault has been stood down pending assessment results. You've potentially saved thousands of lives. Let's see if they stay saved, Jensen replied. Assessment results might convince them I'm worth resuming operations. Then we'll demonstrate you're not, Bashir interjected quietly. Your augmentations are impressive, but they're not board-level threat or founder-equivalent capability. Scientific assessment will show the Dominion you're enhanced human, not strategic superweapon. Jensen appreciated the optimism even while recognizing its naivete. The Dominion's threat assessment wouldn't be based solely on his current capabilities but on projected applications if his augmentation principles were successfully scaled. The assessment began. For 6 hours and 43 minutes, Jensen submitted to comprehensive analysis that would have been invasive if it weren't entirely voluntary. Biosignature scans that mapped every cybernetic component, capability demonstrations where he displayed augmentation functions under controlled conditions, technical interviews where he explained augmentation principles without revealing manufacturing specifications or proprietary details. His optimized systems performed flawlessly. The Titan shield's extended duration impressed Dominion analysts, his smart vision's enhanced range generated excited discussion about reconnaissance applications, and his adaptive learning protocols produced data that suggested his augmentations improved themselves continuously without external intervention. Which was exactly the problem. Because by the assessment's conclusion, the Dominion scientists weren't less interested in his augmentations. They were more interested, their analysis revealing capabilities that exceeded their initial intelligence estimates. Weyaun's final comments confirmed Jensen's concern. The assessment has been illuminating. Your augmentations represent technological sophistication we underestimated. The adaptive protocols, the biological integration, the autonomous optimization, these principles could revolutionize Dominion enhancement programs if properly applied. But you agreed to cessation of acquisition attempts, Sisko interjected firmly. Regardless of assessment results. That was Condition 5. Indeed. The Founders honor agreements. Weyaun's expression was diplomatically neutral. Mr. Jensen will be classified as protected non-combatant with autonomous movement rights. No acquisition attempts will be made. However, he paused deliberately. The Founders would be interested in negotiating technological exchange. Voluntary cooperation, fairly compensated, with Mr. Jensen maintaining complete autonomy regarding participation terms. Jensen's tactical assessment identified the evolution immediately, they'd moved from hostile acquisition to economic negotiation. Not because they respected his autonomy, but because assessment had demonstrated attempting forced acquisition would be complicated enough that voluntary cooperation was strategically preferable. I'm not interested in technology transfer, Jensen stated flatly. To anyone. Federation, Dominion, Section 31, or independent parties. My augmentations are mine. They stay mine. Any attempt to reverse engineer them without consent violates the agreement we just established. Understood, Weyaun replied smoothly. Though the Founders hope you'll reconsider in time. Wars end, Mr. Jensen. Strategic considerations that drive current hostilities may not persist indefinitely. Perhaps when peace arrives, voluntary exchange becomes more appealing than perpetual isolation. The transport returned Jensen to Deep Space Nine 18 hours later. Long enough for news of the assessment to spread through the station's gossip networks, creating expectations he'd have to navigate carefully. Sisko met him at the docking bay, his expression troubled but relieved. Welcome back, Mr. Jensen. The Dominion honored their agreement, no acquisition attempts, no surveillance beyond standard diplomatic monitoring. You're officially classified as protected non-combatant by both Federation and Dominion authorities. And Section 31. Furious. Sloan filed multiple protests with Starfleet Command claiming you've provided strategic intelligence to enemy forces and should be detained pending security investigation. Command rejected the protests. Your voluntary cooperation prevented a major military engagement and saved significant Federation assets. That carries considerable political weight. Jensen nodded slowly, his optimized augmentations already beginning their gradual reversion to safety-constrained operation. In 64 hours, he'd return to normal capabilities, but the assessment data would remain in Dominion and Federation databases permanently. He'd traded temporary vulnerability for lasting strategic equilibrium. Neither side would pursue hostile acquisition because assessment had shown his augmentations weren't worth the operational complications. But they'd also demonstrated that his augmentations were sophisticated enough to generate continued interest, which meant he'd spend the foreseeable future being courted, monitored, and evaluated by factions pursuing technological advantage through increasingly creative interpretations of voluntary cooperation. Some things were universal constants across 3 centuries: power pursued capability regardless of consent semantic packaging. Jensen had survived 2029 by recognizing those patterns. He'd survive the 24th century the same way. By maintaining autonomy absolutely, compromising strategically, and trusting no one who claimed protective motivation. It wasn't the future Dr. Reed had envisioned when she designed his augmentations. But it was the future Jensen had earned through surviving every conspiracy that tried to use him as weapon or asset. And in a universe 3 centuries removed from everything he'd known, that future would have to be enough. 3 weeks after the Dominion assessment, Adam Jensen stood at the same viewport in his Deep Space Nine quarters where he'd first begun to understand the impossible situation his displacement had created. The Bajoran system's rust-colored planet still dominated the view, the wormhole still pulsed with its rhythmic opening and closing, and the station still maintained its precarious position as the war's strategic fulcrum. But everything else had changed. The Dominion fleet that would have destroyed Deep Space Nine remained in Cardassian space, their strategic calculations permanently altered by assessment data demonstrating that Jensen was enhanced human rather than exploitable superweapon. Weyoun visited the station occasionally on legitimate diplomatic business, always finding reasons to engage Jensen in conversations that carefully avoided acquisition language while probing for any shift in his position regarding voluntary technological exchange. Section 31 maintained distance, not abandoning interest but adopting longer-term operational planning. Sloan had sent one final message: "You've won temporary autonomy, Mr. Jensen. Circumstances will eventually demonstrate why cooperation serves survival better than principled isolation. We'll be waiting when they do." The threat was clear, patient, and probably accurate. Wars created circumstances where principles collided with survival, and Section 31 specialized in engineering situations where those collisions occurred under conditions favoring their objectives. But Jensen had 3 centuries of subjective displacement to process those threats. Time was something he had in uncomfortable abundance. Commander Sisko had offered permanent quarters and provisional civilian consultant status, enough structure to provide stability without the constraints of formal Starfleet attachment. Dr. Bashir visited regularly, their shared understanding of augmentation prejudice creating friendship built on mutual recognition rather than strategic calculation. Major Kira maintained professional courtesy that occasionally warmed into genuine respect when Jensen demonstrated he understood resistance against oppressive power. Even Odo had softened slightly, acknowledging that Jensen's voluntary assessment had prevented catastrophe while maintaining autonomy, an outcome the changeling security chief could appreciate despite his natural skepticism. Deep Space Nine had become something Jensen hadn't expected, not home, but refuge. A place where his augmentations generated curiosity rather than fear, where his displacement was acknowledged without defining him, where autonomy was respected even when it complicated strategic calculations. It wouldn't last forever. Wars ended, political situations evolved, and Jensen's unique status would eventually generate new complications requiring new negotiations. But for now, in this moment, he'd achieved something rare in his experience. Genuine freedom to choose his path without coercion disguised as protection. The historical data from Section 31's chip remained archived in his quarters computer, complete documentation of his timeline's fate, everyone he'd known, everything he'd fought for. He reviewed it occasionally, processing grief that 3 centuries should have dulled but remained sharp because displacement meant no time had passed for his subjective experience. Megan Reed had died fighting for augmentation rights, her research destroyed but her principles surviving in scattered resistance movements that eventually influenced Federation policy. His world had burned and been rebuilt, and the principles he'd fought for had mattered even if he'd never witnessed their implementation. The prophets had been right about that. His augmentation represented more than technology. It represented a philosophical position about human autonomy, about enhancement without tyranny, about choosing what you became rather than accepting what others decided for you. That philosophy had survived 3 centuries of political evolution, technological advancement, and species integration. Maybe it deserved defending in this timeline as much as it had in his own. Jensen activated his communicator, connecting to Commander Sisko's office. Jensen to Sisko. I've been reviewing Federation augmentation policy archives. I'd like to discuss potential consultation on enhancement ethics guidelines. No commitment, just conversation about whether someone with my experience might contribute to policy development. Sisko's response carried audible surprise. That's unexpected, Mr. Jensen. But welcome. My office, tomorrow at 0900 hours. We'll discuss what consultation might involve. Understood. Jensen out. He closed the connection and returned his attention to the viewport, watching a Federation starship depart the station. Probably heading to the front lines, carrying personnel who'd fight and possibly die in a war he'd been dropped into without choice or preparation. But maybe that was the point the prophets had been making. Choice wasn't about selecting comfortable circumstances, it was about deciding how you responded to circumstances you didn't choose. Jensen had never asked to be augmented. He'd never asked to be displaced 3 centuries. He'd never asked to become a variable in cosmic probability calculations determining whether augmentation liberated or enslaved humanity's future. But asking didn't matter. Reality dealt its hands regardless of preference, and meaning came from how you played them rather than whether you'd wanted to sit at the table. In 2029, Jensen had played his hand by investigating conspiracies everyone denied existed, by fighting for autonomy when corporate and governmental powers demanded compliance, by choosing principle over security even when security would have been easier. 3 centuries later, different universe, different war, different stakes. But the fundamental choice remained identical. Autonomy or compliance. Principle or expedience. Human dignity or efficient optimization. Jensen had made that choice once in Detroit's burning streets. He'd make it again in Deep Space Nine's strategic corridors. Not as anyone's weapon. Not as anyone's asset. But as himself, augmented, displaced, and absolutely committed to the principle that human enhancement should expand choice rather than eliminate it. Dar. Reed had built that principle into his augmentations through technological design. Jensen would honor it through how he chose to live. Even in a universe 3 centuries removed from everything he'd known, some principles remained worth fighting for. And if the prophets, Section 31, the Dominion, or anyone else thought they could use him as catalyst for outcomes he didn't consent to, they'd learn what 2 years of corporate conspiracy survival training had taught him. Variables could become agents. Assets could reclaim autonomy. And augmented humans who never asked for enhancement could still choose what it meant. That choice, that fundamental human choice, was worth 3 centuries of displacement. Jensen would prove it. One decision at a time, one principle defended, one refusal to be anyone's tool except his own. The Bajoran wormhole opened again outside his viewport, its cascade of brilliant energy connecting distant quadrants for travelers who sought what lay beyond their known horizons. Jensen understood that impulse now. He'd crossed horizons he never intended to traverse, arrived in futures he couldn't have imagined, and discovered that despite 3 centuries of separation from everything familiar, the essential human struggle remained unchanged. The fight for autonomy. The defense of dignity. The insistence that enhancement should expand possibility rather than constrain it. Those principles had survived World War III, First Contact, Federation founding, and centuries of political evolution. They'd survive the Dominion War. And Adam Jensen would ensure they survived him, not through surrender, not through isolation, but through active participation in shaping what augmentation meant for humanity's future. The prophets had brought him here to be a catalyst. He'd accepted that role. But on his terms, according to his principles, preserving the autonomy he'd spent 2 years fighting to protect. Some things were worth displacement across centuries. Some principles justified refusing to run, hiding, or surrender. Adam Jensen had found his. And in a universe that wanted to use him as variable in equations he didn't fully understand, he'd demonstrate that variables could write their own formulas. Beginning now. Beginning here. On Deep Space Nine, at the edge of a wormhole connecting impossible distances, carrying augmentations 3 centuries beyond their design era, fighting a war he never asked to join for principles that transcended any single timeline. It wasn't the future he'd wanted. But it was the future that mattered. And Jensen would face it the same way he'd faced everything since Seraph Industries rebuilt him without permission. With absolute refusal to let anyone else decide what his augmentations meant or what he'd become. He never asked for this. But he'd make it count anyway.